This course is broken down into multiple sections. We'll first learn how to navigate around the interface, and in the next section we'll begin setting up our project. Next we will be adding content into our artboards, and then we'll complete the design using the skills that we've learned in previous sections. After the design is complete, we'll move on to prototyping and sharing our design, and I'll end off with some resources that you can use to continue learning and designing with Figma. This course is designed to walk you through designing a recipe app from scratch, but if you ever want to jump into future videos in the course, there are exercise files included to start wherever you'd like. As we go through the videos in this course, I may introduce certain files that we want to start out with, and you can download these exercise files in the exercise files folder looks like, and you can see to the very left we have an assets folder. If we double click inside of here, this is where we're going to see all of our images, some text files, and these are things that we're going to import into our projects. But if you're following along in specific chapters, I may introduce a new file at the beginning of the video in the bottom left corner, and if you follow that path, you can click inside of the folder, and this is where the Figma files are going to live if you want to start off with the same file I'm using in the video. Now once we begin designing the recipe app, you will be able to start your own file and follow along with me without having to download each file for each video. If you do skip some videos, however, I recommend that you start with the latest file inside of one of these folders as you work through the design with me in the video. In this section, I'm going to teach you how to navigate around the interface. We won't be diving into our recipe app project just yet, but learning these tools in a brief overview to help you become familiar by the time we jump into the next section and begin our project. If you're already somewhat familiar with Figma's interface, feel free to move on to the next section to begin your design. If you're wondering if Figma is right for you, it's good to understand what Figma is. Figma is an online design tool that lets you design, prototype, and gather feedback all in one place. Because your designs are in the cloud, you never have to upload, download, or worry about versions. With Figma, you can create design teams and work together with dozens of people at the same time. Developers can join and inspect and export or copy code for product development. Your marketing team can jump in and edit copy and images. And you can quickly communicate design ideas by sharing interactive prototypes with a link. Figma is an awesome tool for large design teams that want to work closely together without any friction, and is currently the only design tool with this amount of collaborative power. Think of Google Docs for designers. If this feels like the right tool for you, join me in future videos as I explain these features in more detail. To get started using Figma, you'll want to go to figma.com, and then you can click sign up here over to the right, and just enter in your email address and a password that you want to use. And once you do this, it'll ask you for your name and then what kind of work you do. And then you can click create account here. Now, Figma works on almost any modern browser, but it works best in the Chrome browser. So if you're going to use Figma in a browser, I highly recommend using Chrome. And in a later video, I'll show you how to use their desktop app, which has a little bit more functionality. Now that we're signed up for Figma, we can see the start screen here, and this is where we get access to all of our files. So we have 3 sample files that Figma has given us, and we can always double click into there to open those files. But if you want more options with those files, you just click on this More menu here, and we have other options like sharing, duplicating, renaming, things like that. Now we have different ways of browsing our files. Over here on the left, we can browse by most recent, the drafts or deleted files. And we can also create new teams. So we can share files inside of teams for different collaborators. And this is where you're going to create new teams. I'll talk more about this in a future video, but this is where you're going to be able to find your teams. Also, if you want to change any account settings, you can click on this down arrow here, and we can change our account settings, and we can also get the desktop app, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a future video as well. Now, if you don't want to start off with a Figma file, we can actually import files here, so we can import Figma, sketch files, images, different things like that if we want to start off with a different document. Now, over here to the right is the notifications icon, and we're not going to see any notifications yet, but as people start to collaborate with you and they start to comment and things like that, you're going to find those notifications here. Lastly, if you have any questions about Figma, there's this help and resources icon here where you can get access to some video tutorials, the community forum, and things like that. Let's talk about what you can find inside the Figma menu bar. To the right, I have Figma open in a web browser, and to the left, I have Figma open inside of the Figma desktop app. And there are many benefits to running this inside of the app, and that starts with the menu screen. And in both of these windows, I'm going to open up a new file. And if you don't have any existing files, you can just click on New File. It doesn't matter what file you open up, I'm just going to show you the menu bar. So I'm going to double click on both of these to open them up. And first off with the menu bar, as you can see, we have File, Edit, View, History, Bookmarks, People, Window, Help. And this is the Chrome browser. But if I click on Figma, now you have things that are associated within Figma. Object, vector, text. And these tools come in really handy when you're designing with Figma. You can find these same menu options inside of the Chrome browser if you click in Chrome, click on this hamburger menu, and you have some of these same things. I'm going to discuss the menu items inside the Figma app, but if you are using Chrome or another web browser, you can follow along in this hamburger menu. Going from left to right here, we have File, and this is where you can start new projects or files. You can close and open tabs, and you can also save your projects as a .fig. Now, when you're usually editing projects, you don't have to save as you're editing because everything's live and on the browser. But if you want to save an offline instance to store or archive, you can click on the Save as Fig, or you can export different files in your project here. Within the Edit menu, we have the typical undo, redo, cut, copy, and paste. And we also have Paste in Place. And then some great tools that we have are Pick Color. So if there's already a color that you like inside of your project, you can choose this Pick Color and click anywhere within this canvas to choose that color. And any objects that you have selected will adopt that color. You can also set default styles for shapes that you're creating. So when I click on this rectangle tool and I just draw a rectangle here, the default style is this gray color. If I choose to have this black and I have a purple stroke, for example, and I choose the weight of the stroke to be 10 pixels, now I can click on this object, I can go to Edit and set default style, and now when I click on this rectangle again and draw a new rectangle, it's always going to adopt that same style that I set. Now there's also copy style and paste style. So again, if I draw these two rectangles here, I can set a style here of, let's change this back to white. And instead of changing this one back to white, I can click here, copy this style, and then click onto this object and paste the style here, and it'll adopt the same styles that I have set. You can also choose to select all, and that'll select everything within the canvas, which are just these two objects right now. You can select none, or if I select this guy and go into Edit and select Inverse, this will select everything besides what I already have selected, which is this object here. Now there are also some great selection filters that are very powerful. So to illustrate this, I'm going to copy these two objects here, and I'm going to hold down Option and drag to duplicate these. And with these two objects, I'm going to change the fill. Let's change it to black again. And now with these objects, if I click one of these and go into Edit, I can select everything that has the same style. So if I click on this, it's going to select only these two objects. Or I can choose to select all just with the same fill. And that's also, again, going to be these two objects. And so you can see kind of what this is doing. You can select every element within your project that has the same text, and then you can quickly change that text throughout your project. Even if it's through 100 artboards or frames, you can change that text within seconds. These may sound like very simple options, but allows for powerful editing techniques. And lastly, if you want to add any emojis or symbols into your design, you can find those here. Now to show you some things inside of the View menu, first I have to create a frame, and we'll talk more about this later, but I just want to create one real quick to illustrate how the View menu works. Show Pixel Grid works if you enable this. It will show you the pixels themselves. If I zoom in holding down Command, you can see this little grid showing each individual pixel. So that comes in handy when you're trying to place your design on pixels. You can also show layout grids. So it's enabled right now, but we don't have a layout grid. So I'm going to just click plus, and you can see that that shows the grid, or you can hide this. There are other view options like show mask outlines. If you're masking some objects together, you can kind of show where those outline or bounding boxes are. You can show the rulers here, hide and show. You can show different panels, so you can toggle the layers panel on and off here, and you can toggle the entire user interface to show or hide, so everything's hidden in kind of a full screen view here. And then if you want to show just the outlines of your design, you can click on this and it hides everything else, the styling, and just shows you where the outlines are for your project. And now the pixel preview option, if you click on that, I'm going to zoom in to illustrate this. You can kind of see that everything looks sharp right here because it's vector. But if I rotate this, for example, you can see that it starts to get blurry, and that's because it's showing us a preview of what it will look like if this vector was displayed on these pixels on a device. You can also choose to show a transparency checkerboard, and pretty much what this does is if there's anything transparent inside of this frame or canvas, it'll create a checkerboard showing you that it's see-through. When you export it, it's going to be transparent. In this section we have a few zoom controls, and next we can find the next artboard and it'll switch over to the right, or previous artboard will switch to the artboard over to the left. So if I click on this frame, for example, and I hold down Option to duplicate it, I have this frame selected. I can go into View and I can say I want to find the previous artboard. And it's going to jump to this one on the left. Next we can just enter full screen, and it'll just zoom everything up to be front and center. And now we have the Object menu. So let's zoom out here so we can see both of these artboards. I can click on Object, and this is where you can group different selections or ungroup. You can frame a selection. So if I click on these two objects and choose Frame Selection, it will wrap your objects around a frame, and this is a little bit different than grouping, and I'll show you why in a future video. Now we have a few component options, and the great thing about components is that it allows you to reuse a symbol or a design throughout your entire project, and to make quick changes very easily. I'm going to cover this in a lot more detail in a future video, but these options here will allow you to create a component, so it converts this frame into a component, as you can see here. And then here you can go to Master Component. Now because we only have one master component here, if I copy this 500 times, let's say, I can select one of these copies. I can jump in here and select Go to Master Component, and it'll just jump to that master component so I can make those quick changes. Also, if I click on one of the child components and if I change the color or the stroke to be different than that master component, I can always click on this Reset Instance, and it'll reset the style to what the master component is. Next, let's say you have a master component and a few child components. And one of the child components, you want to be able to edit the size and the stroke and everything, and you don't want it to be affected by the master component. You can always detach this and convert it back into a frame where it's not a component by detaching this from the master component. Now I know this all probably sounds really confusing right now, but don't worry because I'm going to cover this in a future video. This is the power of Figma with components and collaborative editing, and it's going to take a dedicated video in itself to really explain how this works. Now you have some other object settings, so you can resize an object to fit inside of a frame, and you can toggle some object clipping to clip and be masked behind another object or not. These options here allow you to bring objects back and forth in the layering scheme. And to show you that here, I'm just going to click on this object. I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to drag this to create a copy. And you can obviously see this layer is on top of this layer here. And so if I want to move this around in the Layers panel, I can click on Send to Back, and it'll send this to the very back. Or I can go to Object and bring forward, bring forward, bring forward. It'll bring that forward 3 times in the layering scheme. You have some quick flip options if you want to flip this horizontally or vertically. Some quick rotation options. You can also flatten selection, so you can see the selection also shows that it's rotated here, but if I click on flatten selection, for example, it's going to flatten this, and now I have selection handles that are parallel to my artboard. So the difference here, if I click on this other object, you can see the width is 150 pixels, and now because the selection handle is contained perpendicular to my frame, it shows the width is 175 pixels. And there's some great reasons why you would want to do that for some particular objects, but just know that you have that ability here. So I've zoomed into my canvas here, and now if I click on this rectangle, you can click on any rectangle you want inside of here, as long as it has a stroke. And now if I go into Object, and I click on this outline stroke, what that does is converts this stroke into an outline. So if I click on this, you can see now that I have this outline. So now when I double click inside of here, you can see that this isn't a stroke, but it's actually a shape that I can now manipulate the inside of the shape and the outside of the shape. And this comes in handy sometimes because now when I resize this, you can see that this stroke that I've converted to an outline actually resizes with it. Let's scroll down here and select this object now. We're going to go back into Object, and we have some Boolean options. And I'm going to talk about this in another video too, but essentially you can join some selections together. So if you have 2 rectangles, if you click on Union, it'll match those to be one shape. Or you can subtract one shape from another, like a cookie cutter method. And there are a few other options here to manipulate these multiple objects to combine into one shape. Now, if you ever want to duplicate any objects in place, you can hold down Command D, or you can click this duplicate selection in place, and then you can delete. Rasterize selection, if I click on this turns a vector shape into a rasterized graphic. So now this is an image. And if I resize this image, you can see the stroke gets skewed and things start to look a little bit weird here. And I can also click on this filled image option here and change things like the exposure, the contrast, saturation, and any other image editing options. Now clicking on this shape here, I'm going to go into Object, and you can show or hide a selection. So if I click on this to hide it, you can see that what that does is it toggles this little eyeball icon in the Layers panel to show and hide. You can also lock or unlock a selection so you don't accidentally change it. So this is hidden and locked, but I can show it and have it still be locked. So if I drag any rectangles, I'm never going to select that, and I won't be able to edit this accidentally. Again, this is just a toggle button to unlock and lock through here. And next you can select a few layers, then you can click on hide other layers, and it'll hide everything that's not selected. Now if you ever want to quickly remove a fill or remove a stroke or swap the fill and stroke, these options are here. So now we have purple as the fill, black as the stroke, and we can just choose to remove the fill altogether. And now if I drag this over some of these objects, you can kind of see that the black is layered over it, but there's not any fill inside of there. Now to show you some items in the vector menu, what I'm going to do is just delete this frame here. I'm going to drag this over and just delete all the objects in here so I just have one blank frame. And now this vector menu gives you some great options, so I'll show you kind of how these work. I'm going to click on the pen tool here, and I'll show you this tool in more detail a little bit later, but let's say we have some weird shape here, and I hit escape and say that I'm done. But what happens if we want to close this shape later? What I can do is double click on this object, and then I can choose this node here, and if I hold down shift, I can select this node as well. And now if I jump into vector, I can join the selection, which will interpret and just create a solid line in between the two open paths. But now if I click Command Z or Control Z on Windows, I can go back into vector, and now I can say I want to smooth join the selection, which will interpret this and make the path really smooth. Another thing I may want to do is I can double click on this object again, and let's say I don't want this node inside of my selection here. So I can select this node again, go into vector, and delete and heal a selection. And that will delete this node, but it'll also try to retain a similar shape that node was taking care of. Sometimes when you use fewer nodes inside of your vector icons, your curves become smoother and it feels more organic. So these three tools can be really powerful. Now let's click done here, and I'm going to just delete this shape, and just for illustration purposes I'm going to add some text. We have a text box here. I'm going to increase the size here to 48 so we can see it. And now this text menu gives us some nice toggle bold, italic, underline. We can convert text to its original case or uppercase or lowercase. Now this force relayout option isn't something that you're hardly ever going to use, if ever. This forces text objects in the selection to be laid out again if fonts you're using got updated. It just verifies that all the fonts are re-rendered to make sure they're using the latest version of that font. I've never used this yet, and I don't think you will either. Now to show you some features in the Arrange menu, I'm going to create a few objects here. So I'm just going to draw a few rectangles. And I'll hold down Option, just copy this. So we have 4 rectangles here. If we select all of these, we have some arrange options. We can round to pixels to make sure that the sizes of these aren't on sub-pixels, like 100.5 pixels. So this will round them to whole pixels in case that accident ever happens. And then you can arrange by aligning objects to the left. I'm going to click Command Z here. You can also align to the top, and you can also pack things. So packing things horizontally fits each object side by side, packing them tightly so there's no margin between those objects. Again, you can pack these vertically, and that will do the same thing, making sure that they fit nice and snug against each other vertically. And then you have some distribute options, so you can distribute horizontally, you can distribute to the top vertically, or distribute bottom. So these settings just help you arrange objects evenly or align them evenly with each other. You can find a lot of those same options here as well. Now under window, we have some basic controls like minimize this window, zoom it to fill the entire screen. You can also select previous and next tabs. Here we only have one tab open, but let's say you have 3 files open. You can jump back and forth between them with these options. Or you can bring all Figma windows to the front. Inside help, I really love this search inside the Mac help. So if I want to find a certain feature in one of these menu options, I can just type it in here like outline, and I can find this outline stroke option. Actually lives under object and right here, so you can quickly find the settings that you're looking for inside the menu bar. There's also some help and tutorial files, and this is where you'll sign out of Figma, or you can toggle developer tools on and off. I've never used these. It's basically just an inspector mode, just like you'll see in Chrome. So you'll get to see some of the HTML that makes up these objects here. But again, I've never used this, and I don't think you will either. So that's just a brief introduction of the menu items here. We're going to go over a lot more of these in much more detail. I know I went over them really fast. It's just to get you basically introduced to some of these things so that you know where you can find different options if you want to go out and design on your own and just play with it. But again, some of these options warrant a much more detailed video to explain, so I'll do that in future videos. To show you the tools panel, I'm going to start off with a fresh new project. So to follow along, just start a new project and we can just work our way from there. The first thing I'm going to do in the tools menu is create a new frame. And this frame tool is used to create new artboards and also to frame certain sections like a navigation menu bar or an iPhone navigation footer. To start off, you can see here on the right we have different presets for frames that we want to create. So I can create an iPhone X frame, for example, here. And I can just click on that and it'll plop that directly in the canvas. Or if I click on this frame tool, I can drag and create a custom frame size at whatever size that I want. I'm going to delete this frame and let's just keep this iPhone X frame as we move along. Now to select any objects, you have this move tool, this move and select. So now I can click on the name of this frame and I can move it. Now I want to create a few shapes, so here's where you'll find your shapes. I can quickly draw some rectangles here. And if I click on this drop down arrow, I have more shape options. So here I can draw an ellipse, and I can hold down shift to constrain this proportionally. And I'll just drag this around. And we have a few of these other ones, star tool, polygon, ellipse. I'll just place these ones for now. Now I can also scale these objects. If I have this circle, for example, I can click on this down arrow next to the move tool, and I can click on this scale tool, and I can just drag any one of these drag handles and scale this down or up as I see fit. Now those are great for simple shapes, and I'm going to just select both of these and drag them up a little bit. But I can also create custom shapes using this pen tool. For example, if I want to quickly create a shape of a heart, let's say, I can do that here. And I'll show you more how to use these controls to create your own shapes. I'm just drawing something quick to show you where these tools live and kind of how they work. And you can see here when we're inside the pen tool, we have other options here too. So we can use this paint bucket tool, for example, to click and paint a certain color inside of that stroke or that shape. And we can also use this bend tool to select certain nodes and bend the shape. If you want to design something more free-form, like a signature for example, you can use this down arrow and select the pencil tool. But before I do that, I'm just going to click done here because I don't want to create the same shape inside of this edited instance. So now I'm going to click on this down arrow and click on the pencil tool, and here's where I can create a quick signature. And I'm using a mouse, so it's kind of messy, but you can see how free form that is. And now when you double click inside of here, you can still use these nodes to edit and clean up the paths here. Now you'll find a basic text tool, and this is where you can add different text. So you can add a navigation, for example. And another thing you can do with the text tool is instead of clicking to add some text, you can click and drag, to create a bounding box that your text is going to wrap and live inside of. Next, we have the comment tool, and this comment tool is really powerful because you can share your designs with anybody on the web. They don't have to install anything, and they can quickly jump in and start commenting on your designs here. So they can click on any area here and say, this circle needs some color, and as soon as they click post, I'll be notified of that, and I can have a conversation directly in here, and I can hover over this to refer back to this conversation. And now if I ever add some color, I can just click this resolve, and it'll archive that conversation, so I don't need to see it unless I pull up my archived conversation. So it's really nice. Now this center area right here is only showing the name of the file right now, which is untitled. This is where you can rename your files, and you can also jump into version history to see what's been going on through different versions. So if I click show version history, you can see what it looks like at 4:16 p.m. or the current version. And I haven't done much in here, so there's not many versions, but this is where you'll find 5, 10, or 15 different versions throughout the last 30 days. Now if I click back to editing here, I can click back on this drop down arrow. I can duplicate this file, I can delete this or jump back into my files or move this file to a certain project. So that's where you'll find the controls for your file. But watch what happens when I click on this circle. All of a sudden I have some contextual options that allow me to edit this circle specifically. So if you hover over this, this is the option for editing an object. So if I click inside of here, it'll show me the nodes, and here's where I can drag some of these nodes around and edit the object. I can click done here, or I can reset the instance. Now this is grayed out because this only applies to components, which we're going to talk about later. But let's say I create a component here, and this component's created. I'm going to just hold down Option and copy this master component, and that creates a child component. And again, I'm going to talk more about how this works in a later video. But now let's say I choose this color to be red, and I choose this color to be blue. Well, because this is a child component of this master component, I can click inside of here and I can say I want to reset this instance to match the master component. And that's what that does here. Now, if you want to mask any shapes with any other shapes, or mask a shape with an image, you can do this here. And I'll show you how this works by adding an image real quick, and we'll mask that with this shape here. So we can go into the Shapes tool, click on Place Image, and now if you visit the Assets folder under the exercise files, you can click on any one of these images, or just find an image on your computer to upload here. It doesn't matter which image. So I'm going to click Open, and now it's going to ask me where I want to place this. And watch this, if I hover over this circle, it'll place the image and mask it inside of here, or this shape. But to maintain some masking control, what I'm going to do is just click outside of any of these, and just click somewhere out of the canvas randomly. And now that we have this image in place, I can click on the image and resize this holding down Shift, and I can resize it to fit somewhat within this rectangle behind it. And now I'm going to hold down Z and drag a rectangle to zoom in here. And after I zoom in, I can select this rectangle, hold down Shift and select the image, and now I can click on this Use as Mask tool, and now this rectangle behind the image is purely a mask that's masking the image above this. So I can still click on this image layer, I can do some resizing within here, and move it around to exactly where I want, and it'll always be masked within this rectangle. Now I want to show you the Boolean tool, and in order to do that, I'm just going to select everything that I have here and just hit delete. And here I'm just going to zoom in holding down the Z key, and I'll just drag a rectangle right here. And now I can add some different shapes here, like a rectangle and a circle. And now I'm going to change the color of this one so you can kind of see which one's on top of each other. Now using this Boolean tool, or this union selection, I can select two of these shapes here, and I can click union, and that creates one shape where I can change the color of this one shape. I can manipulate this as if it's one. But this Boolean effect creates icons that are non-destructive, so I can still double click inside of here, and I can move this around and manipulate this shape to, for example, be wider and centered within this square. So you see you can create some great shapes using some simple squares and circles. Now if I right click and ungroup here, that will undo that change that I made, and I can still select both of these, and here I can choose to subtract the one that's in front from the one that's behind, and so now you can see that it kind of behaves as a cookie cutter. Holding down Command Z, I can undo this, and now I can intersect the selection, so anything that's intersected in between these two shapes is going to keep, and excluding the selection retains the shape above here and the shape down here, and anything that's intersecting it kind of just subtracts that. Now you've seen so far that we have non-destructive editing where I can still move this around and it still retains the exclude feature, but what happens if I want to bake this in now and do some further editing? So this acts like one image, it is two different shapes. I can go in here after I've edited everything and combined my shapes. I can choose to flatten selection. And what that does now is it adds this as one single shape. So now when I double click inside of here, you can see that I can edit the nodes inside of here. And now I can't just grab this circle and move it like I was able to, but now I'm able to do some more advanced techniques to kind of tweak the shape that I want. The last tool I want to show you is the crop image. So again, I'm going to go into the shapes tool, click on place image, and I'll grab one of these shapes again. And once I place this here, I can place it like I have before, or I can click and drag a rectangle, and I can drag this to be the size that I want rather than just clicking it and have it placed as the original size. So now I can click on this crop image here, and it gives me these nice crop marks where I can choose to compose this image in whatever kind of frame that I want. And once I hit return, that's now cropped. Now if I double click inside of here, I can do that same masking technique, and if I resize this, it kind of skews the image within this cropped area. Now those are all the object menus, and lastly to the right we can see more options in the tools panel. One of them is it's showing my name Caleb here because I'm actually logged in with two computers, so even though I'm using my same account, if I'm logged in twice it'll show, hey, Caleb's here in another computer too. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people working on this project, you're going to see those 3, 4, or 5 icons here, and you can click on one of those icons to actually see that other user's mouse and follow where they're designing. Now if you want to share this project with anybody else, you can click this share icon, and you can share this by just copying a link or even embedding a code inside of a blog for people to interact with your designs within a blog like WordPress. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the present feature in a prototype video, but if I click on this, I get a nice preview of my design, and if I've prototyped this, I can click through to interact with my design. You can see that this present mode actually opens up in a new tab here, so I can still toggle back and edit a few things like move this over and jump back into the present mode and see that that changes live, or I can just close it this way and jump back in at any time here. If I want to jump into my view settings, I can choose to toggle some pixel preview, pixel grid, layout grids. So these are a few quick view options that you'll get here in the view menu as well. And to the right it shows you a few shortcuts to toggle these views on and off. Now if you don't want to hold down Z to draw a rectangle to zoom in a certain area, or if you don't want to hold down Command to zoom in and out, you can choose some precise zoom controls by clicking on this arrow here and jumping to 0% or 50%. And there's also some shortcuts here that you can use, like the equal sign or the subtract sign to zoom in and out. Or if you want to zoom to fit, you just tap 1 or 0 for 100%. The last tool in the tools panel is this export assets tool. And you can see that it shows 0 out of 0 selected, that I can't export anything. And that's because before you export anything, you have to actually select these objects and make them exportable and decide what format you want to export them in. So now that I clicked on that to make exportable, let's say we have 2 or 3 or 4 different objects. I'm just going to add another circle here, and I'll make this exportable as well. So we have 2 exportable objects now, and you can click on this export and you can see these 2 layers, and it's going to export both of them as a PNG. Now you don't have the option to name these objects that are being exported in the export panel, but if you want this file to be named something differently, you can click on it here and just double click to change the name right here, and you can name this cake, for example. If you jump back in here, you can see that that's named differently. To walk you through the Pages and Layers panel, let's open up this Pages Layers file that you can find in the exercise folder under Chapter 2. And first off, if you don't see this Layers panel, it may be hidden, so you can go in the View menu and Show Layers panel right here, and this will toggle the Layers panel on and off. Now to show you this Layers panel, I just want to hold down the Z key and I'll draw a rectangle under this login page here just to zoom in a little bit. And you can see, first of all, if you hover over different layers, you can see that those layers are shown in the canvas as well in blue. And each layer has an icon here to the left of it to indicate what this layer is for. So for example, this text layer is a group of all of these text objects here, and that's indicated by a dashed line. And then we also have frames, so the login page, home page, menu, these are all frames that group the objects inside of this device preview. Now frames can also be inside of frames. For example, if you click on this Your Art Museum frame here, we can see that this is app info that's inside of the login page frame. And one nice thing with working with Figma is, for example, if I click outside of this frame here and I go into this home frame, let's scroll over and I can click on Masters Old and New. As soon as I do that, then everything drops down and expands to show me these objects within this frame itself. Now if you want to keep things clean after you're done working with, for example, the home frame, you can click on this little arrow and it'll collapse all of the layers underneath this home frame. And so you can collapse and expand anything that's grouped, like frames. This is a component here, and groups. Now, master components are what you can use to create a design and reuse it throughout your project. And we'll talk about that more in a future video. But this behaves much like a group as well, where you'll have objects underneath this master component. Now, within any of these layers, like this app info layer, you can click and drag this down throughout the hierarchy to move this down in the layers panel. So right now this is behind the background image, and so I can move this down or move this back up where it belongs, where you can see this. You can also move layers onto different artboards or frames by clicking and holding. If you hold, then it'll expand the layers underneath this frame, and I can click and let go, and now this is inside of another layer. I'm just going to click Command Z a few times to undo this. And now another thing that you get with layers, if you right click, you have a number of different menu items to manipulate these layers. So you can send them forward and back in the layer scheme. You can group certain selections if you select multiple layers. You have the option to show and hide a layer, or lock and unlock, or you can flip them, or copy and paste certain styles. Now to show and hide or lock and unlock layers, you also have some icons here. If you hover over any layer, you can quickly click this lock icon, and now if I click anywhere within this area, I'm not able to select this Your Art Museum layer, but I can select any layers underneath this. So it's a great feature if you still want to see the objects in front of other objects, but you want to reach out to the elements behind to interact with them. You can also toggle this eye icon to hide your layers. And if you do hide this layer, you can still expand this layer. And you can see that there are some nested layers here that are also hidden, and that's indicated by this dot saying I'm adopting the same hidden property that you have applied to the parent layer. So working with layers is really great, but what happens when you have a lot of frames and a lot of layers within one page? Well, we have the Pages panel as well. This shows page 1 here, and there's only one page right now in this project. And I can show you how Pages works. If I hit the 1 key, I'm going to zoom out here to show all of these artboards. And let's say I want to organize some of these artboards in different pages. So if I want to do that, I can click on this page 1 here, and you can see that I get a little drop down to create a new page. So I'm going to create a page called Collections. And now if I go back to page 1, I can select any frame that I want or any objects that I want. And if I right click, I can move this to the page Collections. I can also just Command X here and go into the collections page and Command V for a quick cut and paste or copy and paste in between pages. Now, one really nice way that I like to use pages is I always create a page within my project called Archive Land. And I use this Archive Land page for different designs that I might want to archive but aren't necessarily a part of the current design. For example, if I hold down the Z key and zoom into this home frame here, and I'll hold down Command and just scroll down just so I can see a little bit above here too. I can click on this home frame and hold down Option. If I hold down Option, I can drag this up to create a copy. And now I can make a number of changes to this, and if I like this change, I want to commit to this, I can save this in my current design, but to keep this page clean, I can just right click here and move this to Archive Land, and I know that I have access if I want to refer to that later, but I can commit this frame to my current design. To show you how the Components panel works, let's open up this Components panel Fig project, and you can find that in the exercise files under Chapter 2. And in this project we have three simple layers. We have a rectangle, we have an add button, and a heart button. And now we can find the Components panel here right next to the Layers panel. If we click down here, we can see that there aren't any components created yet, and it's telling us to create a component, select a layer, and click the Create Component button in the toolbar. So these are simple layers right now, but I can easily click on this layer and click Create Component. I can click on this heart, Create Component, and now we have two components here. And with these components, we can simply drag and drop these on other frames to reuse these components throughout other parts of the project. And the really nice thing about this is if we ever go into the master component, we can change the color, for example the blue, and it changes everywhere throughout our project. Now, another great way to use components is inside other components. So right here we have two master components, and we can tell that they're master components by this little icon here on the top left of their name. They have four little diamonds indicating that this is the master. But now I can click on this, and if I hold down Option, I can drag this over into this navigation bar that I'm going to create to be another master component. And so I can copy this component inside of here, or I can go into the Components panel and I can drag, for example, this heart, drag this inside of this nav bar here, and now we have these two components inside of this navigation bar. Now the last thing I'm going to do is click and drag a rectangle around all three of these objects, and I'll click one more time, Create Component, and now we have a nav bar component. So if I want to hold down Option, I can copy this, or again, I can click in this component panel and copy this onto other frames. And before I move any further, I'm just going to delete some of these extra objects here. And I'm going to hold down Option and now and copy this frame over to the right. So now we have three frames that have the same components inside of them. We very easily created these three components. And so now, within seconds, I can change the look of this nav bar by double-clicking inside of here to get to this rectangle. I can decide, well, I want this nav bar to be blue now, and I actually want these to be white. So I'm going to double-click inside of here, make this white, and as I'm making these changes, even as I'm selecting the color within here, you can see that this is gradually changing within all of the child components. So these are just some of the basic ways you can create components, and they become really powerful. But you can always find these components inside of this Components panel. And if you want to use these components throughout other projects, you can very easily publish these files to a library to reuse in other projects that isn't even in this Components panel Figma project. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is because these are master components right here, if I delete this master component, it's going to be deleted in the Components panel as well. And now I don't have that same kind of power. If I double click into this component here, I can still change the color of this heart, and it changes red everywhere else, but it's not because of this component we created before, it's because it's living inside of this component that I'm editing. So that's just a basic overview of how components work, just to show you this Components panel and where you can organize your components here and reuse them throughout your project. To show you how team libraries work, I need to first show you how to add a new team into Figma. So down here, when we very first start up Figma in the start screen, we have this new team icon, and here you can name your team, and if you go through this process, there will be options to invite new members to the team. Because I already went through this, I'm going to click cancel, and I've enabled a paid account under the team Brainspin so I can show you this feature. Now if you're working with the free account, you don't have access to the team libraries, so you won't be able to follow along with me, but I'll still be able to explain kind of how team libraries works and how the panels works. And if you do have a paid subscription plan, feel free to just add a team and then click new project here. And I'm just going to call this project Bootstrap Styles, and I'll click create project here. And once I have this project set up, I can import my file here, and let's import the bootstrap_styles fig file. And now we can open up this bootstrap styles fig file, and we can see a number of buttons that were designed for Bootstrap. So now that we're in a team and we have these buttons designed, let's say we want to use these across multiple files and share these designs with the team so they can use these buttons throughout their project. Well, first thing I'll do is click on this components panel here, and we can see that they're not set up as a component yet. So what we would do is click on each of these elements and just click create component. And you can see there's a button primary, there's a button secondary, and just go through here and click on the create component for each of these in the top row. So now we have these components set up, and here we can start with the primary button here. If I right click, I can publish this one component to the team library, and if I click on that, we can see that now this is in the team library section, and I can always remove this from the library. But what does that mean now that this is added in a library in the libraries panel? Well, I can click down here, and I can see that we have this file called Bootstrap Styles, and if I click in here, we have that one button we can reuse throughout multiple files. Well, I'll go back here into the components panel, and I'll just click this info, and I'll add this to the library. Well, let's just add them all. So now we have these all added to the library, and we can see a little sync icon here saying they've been added, but they haven't been published yet. So if I go to any other file and try to access these, I'm not going to be able to find them. So I'll just click this publish, and it'll give me a view of everything that's going to be added to the library. And so I'll click publish changes, and now these are all added to the team library. So now all I have to do is click on this plus icon to create a whole new file. And as I'm designing, I can click to create a new frame here, and I'll go to desktop and create a desktop frame. And so now that somebody else on my team may have created and shared those styles, I can jump here to the team library and jump into Bootstrap Styles and say, I guess I want this primary button, I want to use this throughout my project here. So if I hold down Option, I can copy this 3 times here. And now that I have these inside my file, I can still double click on these, and let's click on the layers panel so we can see how these look here. So I still see this background, I can see the text, and I can change this text to click on me. I can resize those. And if I want to change the look of this, I can click this Go to Master Component, and it will jump into this project where the master component is, and here I can double click inside of here to change this to green, for example, and I can go back into my project and nothing's changed yet. But if I go back into this Bootstrap Styles, you can see that it's shown here that I've changed the style, but I haven't published the change. So as soon as I click publish, or if any team members click publish, then it's going to tell me this is going to be updated in the library from blue to green. So I'll click publish change here, and we'll click on Untitled, and everything is still blue. But you notice here on the bottom right we have an alert that says component updates available. So I can click dismiss or review here, and I'll click dismiss right now. And one thing that's really nice is you're not surprised by some quick changes by team members, and you don't have to adopt those changes that they created. But if we ever wanted to adopt those changes later, we can click on this team library panel here, and let's click this back button, and we can see that there's one update available. So I'll click on that update, and it'll tell me this button primary in Bootstrap changed to green here. So I'll decide I want to update this. So I'll just click update, and now everything's changed to green. It still has that blue stroke. So I'll go back in here and I'll double click on this again, change this blue stroke to maybe the same, maybe a light green stroke or a dark green stroke. Let's just do that. Same thing here, publish the change. Now that it's published, we can go back into our other project and we can click review immediately this time and update all changes. So the power behind team libraries is you can have one team member that is designing all of the styles for a certain project or for multiple projects. And at the same time, you can have somebody else working on the project itself, adopting those styles, dragging them in, and applying those. And then they can decide whether to adopt changes later as the style grows. So it's a great way to reuse styles and elements, not just in your project like Master Components allows, but throughout multiple projects and throughout the entire team. To show you the design panel, I have a simple artboard here with a few elements on them. And this design panel will change depending on what you have clicked on. So here we have a basic home screen for a recipe website. And when we don't have anything selected, this design panel reflects the canvas or the backgrounds that the frames are sitting on. So here we can change the color of this background if we want it to be more dark, for example, or if we want the background to show in some exports. And we can also change the transparency and choose to enable pixel preview or pixel grid preview right here. So all of our design properties are around the background here because we don't have anything selected. So when we select this chef's hat, we can see the properties change to reflect this hat. So we can still move this around, and we can move the X and Y coordinates here. You see the properties panel is changing. And we can also resize the width and the height, and we can lock the proportions. So if I want to change the height here to be 30, then the width is going to change to reflect that ratio. You can also quickly change the rotation by 15 degrees, and also if you hold down Command while you're hovering over these anchor points, you can rotate them with your mouse as well. Now, one really nice feature in Figma are the constraints tools. With these tools, we can constrain any objects to the left top of this artboard or frame, or we can pin it to the right or the center. So we have all of these controls to constrain our objects for responsive design. For example, this one, if I choose to scale this, I'm going to click on this desktop frame now, and I'm just going to resize this, and you can see that both of these items scale here. Now I'm going to hold down Command Z and undo that. We don't want this to scale. What we want it to do is pin to the top left here. This one can pin to the top left, and maybe these guys here can pin to the top right. So we have those set up, and now when we rescale this, you can see up the top here, that behaves how it's supposed to. So as you can see, there's very nice controls here for constraints. And then we have a layers section, and this is where we can get some overlay settings if we want something to multiply. So white multiplied by anything is that color. If we change it to red, you can kind of see how it's transparent. I'm going to hold down Command here and zoom in so you can kind of see what that's doing. But you can play with some different overlay effects here and get a nice style that you want. I'm just going to change this back to white, and just normal is fine. So you have some nice opacity effects here. You can increase the transparency here, or just simply hide the layer if you want to. And then you have fill control. So this is where you'll change the actual color, and we saw that as I was changing this around. So you can change this to blue, and we can create a fill on top of a fill, which is really great. So if I click on this plus icon here, you can see that I have a linear fill on top of a solid fill. So that gives us this nice white on top of blue, and I can change the angle of these pretty quickly and just get a nice effect if I want one something like that. Looks good. And so multiple fill options, and within this fill color you can fill with a solid color, a linear color, radial, angular, diamond, or an actual image. So if you click on image here, it's going to ask you to choose an image, and you can find one in your file and fill that image. If I ever want to delete a fill, I can just click on the fill here and just click this subtract button, and it'll remove that. And now I'll turn this back to white. And we have stroke, and again we can create multiple stroke colors. I'll just create this as blue, and I want this to be on the outside of the icon. You can change the weight. You have some nice dash settings if you want that stroke to be dashed, if you want the dashes to be capped, things like that. Now we also have some effects settings, and I'm going to show you. If I hold down command and just scroll down, I'll zoom out here, and you can see this background here. We actually have two effects here. So when you click on the plus icon, it adds a new effect in here. I'm going to just delete this one. And then you can choose between an inner shadow, drop shadow, layer blur, or background blur. Now this background blur is really nice because you have the ability to turn down the opacity. I'm going to turn this to 70 here so you can kind of see what's going on in the background. And you can see this layer has blurred the background. And these settings can be changed right here. So I can decide I want this to be a 30 pixel blur. And you can see it's becoming more blurred. And then just tune the opacity however you want to see that blur in the background. Maybe I'll tune this to 90. And same thing with drop shadow. Just click this icon to see the blur settings. And if you want a Y coordinate here, if you want to drop this shadow down 2 pixels, that'll happen here. And you can change the opacity here, and also some overlay effects for that shadow itself. So very powerful controls just for basic shapes like these icons or these rectangles. You can also see this rectangle shape. I've actually removed the fill. So if it starts out with the fill, you can just click over here and click the subtract icon, and it'll remove that fill. And now I only have a stroke. And with this stroke, I've actually created a dashed line here, so you can see that here. There's a 2 pixel dash and a 2 pixel gap. And if I click away, you can kind of see that dash and gap here. So with this chef's icon, with this rectangle, and these icons, we get the same kind of design panel here that's meant for vector shapes. But now when I click on this background here, and we can see, although this looks like an image, it's actually a rectangle with an image fill applied. So we have this image fill here, and then we have a black 20% opacity layer fill on top of that. And then we have a linear fill just for the top, just to give a little black transition down so this text is easier to read here. So this is all one object, and it has 3 different layers. It makes it very nice to quickly go in and change some of these. So let's say maybe I only want a 5% opacity here. We can change that very easily. And if I want to edit this image at all, I can click on this little thumbnail. And I have some nice exposure controls. If I want to change the exposure, some contrast, change that here. And we can change the temperature if we want it to be warmer or colder. We can do that very easily. And then we have other controls like tint, highlights, and shadows. Now one thing I haven't shown you yet are the alignments and the distribution tools. So if I click on this icon here, and let's just mess this up a little bit. Just drag these around here. If I want these to be aligned, I can hold down Shift and just select the multiple items here. And I have some alignment controls up here to align things to the top, align to the bottom. Now these are the same height, so top and bottom are both aligned, or align center. And then we also have distribute horizontal spacing, which will make sure that this has the same spacing between each icon. So if I wanted, I can click on these icons, just align them to this text here, and do that to start out with, and then hold down Shift and select these different objects, and we'll distribute these evenly, we'll align them evenly, and now we can move this text to be aligned with this object itself. So very nice to just have a clean design here. And now with different text layers, you can see we have some of the similar properties like constraints. We can resize here very easily. But now we have a text section. And this is where you're going to change your font styles, your weights, and the sizes. And if it's multiple lines of text, like we see here down below, we can change things like the line spacing. I'm going to change this to 120%. You can see how that spacing increases here. Also the spacing between characters. So if we want to increase that by 15%, we can do that. And maybe I'll just do 5% because that was a bit dramatic. And also paragraph spacing. So if we want to change this to 20, you can see only the paragraph was spaced. And now we can align this text to the top of the bounding box, the center of the bounding box, or the bottom of the bounding box. So now if we change this bounding box to be taller, we can change where that lives inside of this box. We also have paragraph indentation and some alignment tools that you find in some common text editors. But there are some hidden effects here as well. So if we drag this down here and we click on this advanced menu, we have things like auto resize the width, and you can see what that did here. It made it as wide as the text allows. I'm going to hit undo. And we have some other objects like transform this to all uppercase, all lowercase, or just correct capitalization. And then we have some underline or strike through effects here. Makes it very handy. And then we have some more advanced font features like fractions, all small caps, superscript or subscript. And then we can change the way fonts are aligned by proportional alignment, tabular, proportional old style, or tabular old style. So a lot of great advanced features for fonts, as well as the normal stroke effects, layers, and constraints sections that you get with other objects. Now there's one more section we haven't talked about here, and that's the export section. And this is with every object that you select, you have the ability to export that object. So we have 3 icons here, and let's say we want to export this out as we develop for the iPhone. Well, we can click on this plus export, and we can see that this is going to export as a one-time PNG. And we can change this to JPEG or SVG, but if we only want PNG, we can click plus a few times to even export this out as 2 times resolution, 3 times resolution, and get multiple file sizes with just one export of this spoon. Same thing with this fork, just click this 1, 2, 3, and you have 3 different sizes that are going to be exported, and this knife, 1, 2, 3. So with this we can quickly click preview and see how this is going to look in the preview, and then export this file into any folder that you want. Now because I set these to be exportable, if I ever change them and then export, it'll actually export the changes. And I can click on this tool here to export in bulk all of the items I've already set previously to be exportable. They'll all be here, so I can do a one-time export of everything in my project. The prototype panel is where you're going to go to connect all of your artboards for an interactive prototype. And that lives right next to this design tab here. So I'm going to click on this prototype tab, and it's first going to ask, what do you want the background to be when you're in prototype mode? And to jump into prototype mode, you click on this present icon, and it opens up a new tab, and this tab will show you what this prototype is going to look like. And I can jump into this tab here to link up this prototype, and I can toggle between these 2 tabs to see my prototype or my design. So it's very simple to link up a prototype. You can see if I scroll here to the left a little bit and I click on this login page here, there's a circle here that's new to this bounding box, and I can click and drag on this circle to present a wire that I can bring to any other artboard and link up. Now instead of doing that, I can also just click on the login button itself, and I'll double click inside of here, and we can see the same circle. So this login button, I want to go to the home page, and so just watch how quickly I can link up this prototype here. Here's the hamburger menu. I'm going to double click into there, and that'll open up this page. And if I zoom in a little bit, I can quickly link up these menu items. So I can double click into exhibitions and events, if I want to link up the shopping, the collections, and I think we have tickets, let's plan your visit, and one more is the membership. So become a member. So now those are all linked up. And if I double click inside of here, we can link all of these back into this menu icon. And now I can choose to have this area go back to this artboard here. Or let me change this. I'm going to change it to go back to this artboard. So we should have everything linked up. And we can see here there's this little home icon saying this is where your prototype is going to first land. So I can click on this and I can bring this to any other place that I want. And that's all this prototype panel does for you, is it just enables you to have quick access to wire these artboards up. Then you can click on this play icon, which is right here. It'll tab back over here, and then you can interact with your prototype, opening the menu item, go into exhibitions, go into your collections, and just jump through your prototype very easily using the tools in the prototype panel. If you still have the previous file open from the last video, we can continue along, and if not, just open up the prototype panel file in the Chapter 2 exercise files folder. Now we're using the same file just to illustrate the coding panel and what happens in here. So because we don't have anything selected, we have the background, and it's telling us the hex value here for the background of this canvas. And so you can see very quickly, if you were to be programming in CSS, you can grab some quick code to place into your design files. Same with iOS, you have this RGBA background color or Android. So you can quickly change that, or if you want to click on this code, this gives you the CSS properties. So now you have background colon and then the color, and you can quickly copy that and paste that into your development project. So that's simple enough for the background. But now if we click on some of these other elements here, I'm going to hold down Z and just zoom into this login page. And let's double click on this login button here. So we can see very quickly we have the width, height, and then left and top padding here. So very easily we can click and select this, paste this into our CSS files. Same thing with iOS or Android. And we can get some table views here or the code view. And this really can happen with almost any object here. We have this pin drop, I'm going to do the same thing. And because this is SVG, it kind of gives you this view where you can copy and paste this. And with images, again, you have the position, the height, left, right, and it'll give you the file name of that image. So if you're designing anything in Figma to then code later, or if you want to give your design files to your developers, make them aware of this code panel, because it'll likely save them a lot of time trying to guess certain colors or different font styles by just jumping in here, grabbing these, and applying them to their code. Now I do get a lot of questions about Figma being able to convert your whole design into code, and although it doesn't do that as far as the entire design being placed into code and structure it, this is still really nice for your developers to take these little snippets of code or information and code and structure the code themselves. When you sign into Figma, getting started creating a new file is as easy as clicking one of these three buttons here. But you may have multiple files that you want to be grouped into one project. So to get started creating a new project, you first have to click on this new team icon here and create a team for your project. Now in this course we're going to be creating a chef recipes app. So I'm going to go ahead and name this team the chef team. And if you don't want to start out paying the $12 a month, you can just start with this free starter program. So I'll get started for free here. And you can see here we have the chef team. And now I can start my first project. I'm going to call this the chef recipe project. And when you start this new project, you can decide whether everybody on the team can edit, view, or if you want to just choose who has access in the future. So I'm going to allow everybody on the chef team to edit. And now I'll create this project here. And now that this project is started, we could create new files, one for the iPhone app, one for the website, and one for marketing material. So that's how projects work. The first file that we're going to create in our project is the Chef Recipes app. So we can name this file by clicking on the text here. We'll just name this chef_recipe app. And now if we go back to the start page, we can see that we have that file here inside of our projects that is inside of the chef team. In the last video, we created a brand new project and a new file, the chef_recipe_app. But what if you've started your project already inside of a program like Sketch? Or what if you want to start with a template and build your designs out from there? Figma does really good with importing sketch files and maintains the quality and the layering scheme that you would expect. To give you an example of this, I'm going to go into our exercise files under the assets folder, and you can see we have a recipe app template sketch file here that we can import. Now you can drag and drop any sketch file directly into this project, or you can browse the way that I did and click open. And while this is loading, this happens to be a template that I found on a website called Sketch App Sources. Now Sketch App Sources have tons of templates, whether it's the iOS template guidelines, material design. You can see some Tesla dashboards here. So feel free to go onto this website and browse these thousands of templates, and if there's something that you like with a certain flavor that matches where you'd like to start, you can click download resource here and then import it later here into Figma. Now that this is imported, we'll click done, and now we can see this template here, and if we double click inside of here, we can see how this looks. Now one of the first things that we can see is we may not have the fonts that were used in this template. So you can go online and find these, or use Typekit to find the certain fonts and load them before you get started with your design. Or you can just dismiss this and update your fonts later. We can see that this sketch template had 2 pages. If we click on here, we can see a symbols page and then a page 1. So this is where they retained all of their symbols inside Sketch. And these symbols are converted into master components, which is really great. We're going to go back to page 1 here, and we can see these different frames, and we see that the background is gray, so we have a hard time distinguishing the boundaries between some of these frames. So all we have to do is go to this background area and change this to be light gray, and we can kind of see the contrast there between the frames and the background here. And another thing that you notice is, although it retains a lot of the layering schemes and some of this font here, there are times where some layers may not import correctly. So if we go to this login and sign up, for example, there's some missing text here between the login and sign up button and things like that. So it may be worth your while to open up the Sketch program and find the few layers that may be missing and add those in manually. But you can see how much time this will save you getting started with Figma if you're starting with a sketch file. In a previous video, we set up a team, and that's this chef team. And this is where we set up a project here for our chef recipe app. If you skipped this video, you can click here to set up a new team and name this team whatever you want. I'm going to hit cancel here because I already have one created, but if you haven't, go ahead and create this team. And once you do, you'll get this little view here for your team. And you can see inside of this chef's team, I have one project here, but I don't have any team members working with me. To really harness the power of Figma, I want to invite a new team member here. So I'm going to click on this invite a team member, and I'm just going to type in somebody's email. You can type in multiple people's email in this text field, and then you can choose what access they have to the projects inside of this team. So whether they're an admin of the team, or they can edit any projects within this team, or only view. So here I'm going to give them admin access, and I'll just click invite here. Their name and their avatar is going to be grayed out until they accept my invite. And once they do, they'll see the same team here when they log into Figma. They'll see all the projects that you're seeing, and they can click at any time and edit regardless of if someone already has this project open. If you have any questions or would like help throughout this course, feel free to add me as a team member inside of your project as well. You can add me at caleb@brainspin.com. And once I accept your invite, you will be able to use the comment feature to ask me specific questions, and I can jump in and help you resolve them. After she's accepted the invite, you can see the name and avatar here. So now if I click on my chef recipe project here, we can see that we have these two files here, and we've invited one member to our team. And now we can see Marlene is in this file here. So if I want to collaborate with her, I can double click, and you'll see her mouse here and her avatar here saying that she's actually interacting with the design. So now we're going to ask her to drag this home artboard around, and you can see her dragging that live. And if you want to follow her mouse while she's doing that, just click on her avatar here, and it'll follow her as she interacts with things. So maybe drag that back up to the top here, and you get a nice view here of what she's doing. And this is really helpful if your background has 100 artboards and you're not sure where she's interacting with a certain artboard. Just click on this name here, and it'll zoom the canvas right into where she's working. So now I've asked Marlene to add some text into the sign in and sign up button, so she's going to go ahead and do that now. And while she's filling in that content, I can style this for her. So let me zoom in here, and I can see that she already typed this sign in button, so I can go in here and change this to be white, change the font size to be 16, and if I want to start out with this size, I can hold down Option Command C to copy this style, Option Command V to paste it over here, and then I just want to change this color. So I'm going to change this to the same orange right here and get started here. So you can see how easy and how close I can be designing with her as she's creating content and I'm stylizing it. And then I can go and hold down Option and bring this text over here for sign in and here for sign in. And this is also very helpful if you're on an online screen sharing session with a client or with a collaborator, to have them open up the Figma as you are, and you guys both designing together as you're discussing your project is very powerful and very helpful. Inside the Assets folder under Exercise Files, you'll find this Design Templates text file. Now this text file just has a link to these 4 resources here to find design templates. And these templates come in very handy. For example, if you're designing for iOS 11, you can go to developer.apple.com, and they have design resources in this link here for Sketch, for Adobe XD, for other design files. And remember, if it is a Sketch file, you can import that directly into Figma and start from there. Alternatively, if you're designing for Android, you can get the material design template here in material.io. And these 2 links below are community resources for Sketch files and for Figma files. So take a minute to visit these links and familiarize yourself with a few templates, because it could really help save some time. For example, if you download the iOS 11 design template from developer.apple.com, you get this folder, and not only does it give you the sketch files here, the production templates, but it also gives you the fonts used inside of this template so you don't find missing fonts once you load this up into Figma. So you can click inside here, you can see that we have all of the San Francisco Pro font packages that come with the iPhone design. Then we have production templates here that are for app icons or for navigation flows. In the last folder here we have UI elements, designs, and guidelines, and you can hit the spacebar on a Mac and kind of see a preview of the elements that you're going to get once you import this template into Figma. I would highly encourage you to save these links in your bookmarks folder, because as you're continuing to design, these are going to come in very handy. Okay, by now you've learned the interface and you've learned how to set up a project. And now you should have the skills that you need to begin working with content and begin developing an app. As you can see in this image here, I've already sketched the kind of design that we're going to be creating inside of Figma. I sketched this on my iPad, and this is available in your Assets folder as well as a PNG. And now it's time to get our hands dirty adding some content. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into Figma here, and in a previous video we've already set up a chef_recipe_app file, but if you haven't done this yet, you can just click on New File here and get started from scratch with us. If you do create a new file, I'm just going to open up this file that we have. Your file name should say Untitled right here, so to change that, just click inside of this text area and you can name this whatever you'd like. So now we have this new fresh file here. Anytime that you'd like to, you can go into the Assets folder and find this PNG image and just open it up for reference as we begin designing. So the first thing we're going to do is set up 5 frames because we know those are the artboards we're going to start out with. So to create new frames, we can click on this frame tool here, and rather than dragging a custom shape like we're doing here, I'm going to hit delete, and we can go into here in the presets, and I know I'm going to be designing for the iPhone 8, so I'm just going to click on this preset here for an iPhone 8 frame. Now if I hold down Command and scroll down, you can zoom out here, and I'm just going to hold down Option as I drag this 4 other times. Okay, so now we have 5 artboards, and one thing that you can do to make your frames even is hold down Shift and select all of them, and then we can use this distribute horizontal spacing here. So now we have some even spacing, it looks really nice. The next thing we want to do is name our frames. So we can click on the name here, and if the frame is blank, you can always click inside of the frame to drag it around, but once you add some content in here, like a rectangle for example, now if I click inside of this area, I can't drag it anymore. I have to click on the name here to drag it around. So I'll delete this. Now let's just name our frames. The first one's going to be the splash screen. Second one is home. Third is recipe. And I'll just name this recipe details. And this will be recipe details complete. And the last one here we'll name menu. So we have our 5 artboards, and you can drag these around very easily to reorder or reorganize them as you're going along. And now I can actually drag and select all of these. I'll click on this distribute tool again, and we're good to go. Now a few shortcuts that you'll want to know is the number 1 on the keyboard will zoom everything into place, and the number 0 on the keyboard will zoom into 100%. So they're really nice toggles to jump back and forth in some zoom commands. Now that we have these frames set up, we want to enable a layout grid. So to do that, we can click and then hold down Shift and click the following objects here. We can also click inside of the layers panel, hold down Shift, and click the bottom layer to select all of them. And you can see here in the design panel, we have a layout grid section that we can just click this plus icon, and instead of a grid here, we can change the grid size to 15 pixels. We can change the opacity of the look, or we can jump into columns here, and I'm going to change the column count to 6, and I know I want the gutter to be 10 pixels in between the columns, and I also want a 10 pixel margin here in between the columns as well. And I tend to find this red color a little bit more pronounced than I'd like, so I'm going to change the transparency here to 5% just to hide that a little bit more. And now that I see this layout, I'm thinking I probably want the edges of the frame here to have a 20 pixel margin for content, so it's not writing right on the edge of that screen. So we still have the 10 pixels here in between each column, and this margin gives us 20 pixels on the sides. If you only select one of these and you edit the layout grid here, there's no way to really copy that style from this frame to this other one, so it's very important as you're setting these up to set them all up in the frames they're going to apply to. Now all of these frames are set to 375 pixels by 667 pixels, and that's the device screen size for the iPhone 8, but there are times where your design is going to go beyond the device screen where you'll scroll up and down, and so to resize these after they're created, for example the home screen, you can click and drag this down and resize this. So I like to start everything at the device screen height, and then as I'm developing the shapes and the styles, if it starts to go past the screen, you can quickly click and just drag down to increase your frame size. Also, if you want to see more contrast between your frames and the background, for example, if your frames start out as gray, you may not see a contrast here between the gray background and the gray frame. So you can always click on this background setting here, and you can change this down or up. You can change it to really whatever color that you want. But I like to have it just this light gray color here. Let's begin adding and combining shapes to our design here, and we'll start off with this splash screen. So if you just hold down Z and draw a rectangle, you can zoom into the splash screen. And the first thing I want to do inside of this splash frame is draw a rectangle that's the same size as the frame here. And the reason why I want to do this is to change the fill color to this default red, but I also want to display an image inside of this shape. So I can click on this fill again, and I can fill this shape with an image. And here it's going to ask me to choose the image. And under the assets folder, you can choose any of these images that you'd like. I'm going to choose this entree lasagna JPEG here. So I can click open, and you can see that that's now the background of this frame, but I want to move this image fill down below this color fill. Now I want to change the opacity of this red fill to 90%, and I actually want to hide the layout grid here to make this a little bit easier to see. And so we have our first shape. It's this rectangle here. If we click and drag, you can see this rectangle snaps to the frame edges. And with rectangles or other shapes, you can click on these radius anchors to expand or decrease the radius of this shape. And if you want to manipulate the individual radiuses of this shape, you can hold down Option and drag, and that will only drag the radius in and out just for that one corner. We're going to leave those the same here. And now let's create a chef's hat icon. So we can do this by using a few ellipses. So I'll just draw some, and I'll hold down Shift so I can constrain the width and the height. And let's just drag this out something like this. And I'll hold down Shift to select all of these guys and make sure that everything's distributed correctly. And I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit more here. And this is going to take some playing around with, so maybe I will select this circle, and if you hold down Shift and the up arrow key, it will nudge this about 10 pixels each time that you hit the arrow key. So I've just nudged this up 20 pixels, and I've got a nice shape here. And now I'll draw a rectangle here for the bottom area of the hat. I'm just going to move this around just a little bit. And now if I want, I can click, hold down Shift, and select these three circles. I'm just going to group these for now, so that when I hold down Shift and select this rectangle, I can align everything to the center, make sure everything's aligned really good, and I'll just hold down Shift Command G to ungroup everything now. So we can see these shapes. We have three circles and one rectangle, and that's making up our chef's hat. Now with this chef's hat, I actually want the corners here to have a radius. So I can do that by clicking on this radius anchor and changing that. I think 7 pixels looks good. And we have the starting of our chef's hat already. So all we need to do at this point is select all of these shapes by holding down Shift. There's 3 simple shapes. And we can come up here and we can see some settings for joining some shapes together, for subtracting them. And you can play around with these to create some nice combination effects for simple shapes. So I'm just going to use the union selection, and now we have one simple shape. I can change the fill color of this shape if I wanted, or I could even remove the fill of this shape and add a stroke. And the stroke, let's make this white, and let's say I want this to be 10 pixels. So we have this acting as one shape here, but I can still double click to drill down into this, and you can see that it is actually behaving as 4 different shapes that are joined together. So I can still tweak this a little bit and give it a little bit more personality if I wanted. Make these a tiny bit uneven. Which is very handy to make some subtle changes there. The last thing I'm going to do for this shape is I will click in the Shapes tool and create a line. And I'm just going to click and drag holding down Shift. And I want to copy this same style. So I'm going to right click here and copy style. And I'll right click on this image and paste this style. We have a nice pasted style, but I want the ends of this line to be rounded. So I can jump into the advanced menu of the strokes and decide that I want the cap to be rounded. got a nice rounded effect. And now I'm just going to select this line, hold down Option, and just drag down to get just one more line below that. And now I want to join all of this as one shape. So I'm going to hold down Shift while I'm selecting these two lines and this one shape. And now that I have these three selected, I can hit Command G, and that will all be grouped into one shape. Now if we scroll down and move over into the home frame, there are a few other icons that we can recreate with basic shapes here as well. So I'll just zoom into the top area here for some navigation icons. And we want a search icon here on the home page and also a menu icon. So the menu icon can be very simple. I can go back into the Shapes tool and click on Rectangle. And here I'm just going to quickly draw a hamburger menu. So I'm going to hold down Option here and copy this, leaving 6 pixels in between. And we can see that this shape is 41 pixels by 6 pixels. I'll just make this an even 40 by selecting all of these rectangles and choosing 40 pixels in the design panel. And then I want this to have a little bit more personality, so I'm going to just decrease the size of these a little bit to make the menu icon look a little bit staggered. And the last thing I want to do here is I actually want these radiuses here on the right side to be curved. So zooming in here, if I want to do that and curve these edges, what I can do is select all 3 of these rectangles, and I can change the radius here. If I change this to 3 pixels, you can see that everything changes to 3 pixels. But what if I want to individually change the pixel sizes on each corner? Well, I'm going to undo this, and here, this gives me control to change the radiuses for each corner, starting with the top left. So the top left we know we want to be 0, and the top right we want to be 3 pixels, and the bottom right we want to be 3 pixels, and then we want the bottom left to stay 0 pixels. So we have our hamburger menu here, and we can group this as well by just selecting everything and choosing Union Selection, and now we have this one icon. Here I can change all of it to be black, red, whatever color that I want here. So now we want to create a magnifying glass, and we can do that by going into the Shapes options here. I'm going to click on the Ellipse tool, and holding down Shift, I'll just drag and draw an ellipse. And we'll start out at 23 pixels, I think that's good. And we can actually remove the fill here by selecting on the outside of this row, clicking the subtract, and then we'll add a stroke. And we want the stroke to be red. And I think inside the stroke is good. We can align this to the outside, the middle, or the inside. We're going to keep it on the inside. And I'm going to have the stroke weight be 2 pixels here. Now I'm going to draw a rectangle. And 4 pixels is good, maybe 4 pixels by 10 or 12. And we can change this later if we want. And the fill of this we're going to change to be the same red color. And I'm just going to select both of these and align them. So we have 2 simple shapes here. And you'll notice when I try to align this, this has 23 pixels, but this has 4 pixels. So we have an even width and an odd width, which is making it look a little bit staggered. So to change that, I'm just going to change the width of this to 20 pixels, so they're both even. I'll do an align again. And let's just nudge this up with our arrow keys. Now one thing that you can do with rectangles or circles or any other shape, if I zoom in here, I can select this rectangle, and if I hold down Command, with my arrow keys I can nudge up or down, and it will decrease or increase the size, whether it's the height, or if I use the right or left arrows, it's the width. So it's a very nice shortcut to nudge the sizes to get it precisely the way that you want. Now I'm going to add just a small radius here of 1 pixel around, so we have nice rounded corners on this magnifying glass. And the last thing we can do is select this fill and this stroke and choose Union Selection. It actually combines the stroke with the fill, which makes it quite nice. Now if I double click inside of here, I hold down Shift to select this circle. I'm just going to rotate the both of these at 45 degrees and hit return. And now we have this shape. This shape shows 25.85 pixels. and we want it to be an even 40 pixels. So I can click here to constrain the proportions and choose this to be 40 pixels. And now if I hold down Command and zoom out with my scroll wheel, you can see that it's proportionally the same width as this hamburger menu. So I'm going to bring this over here, and we have a nice starting out of a hamburger menu and a magnifying glass menu with some basic simple shapes. Now in the same home page, we can tap R for rectangle, and if I hold down Shift, I can constrain the size of this. And we want this rectangle to be 221 by 221, so we'll just match it with the columns here. And this is going to be where our image is going to live, but to the top right of this image, we're going to have a heart icon. So I'm going to just zoom in here, and to draw a heart, I'm going to click and drag I'll start out with a 10 pixel by 15 pixel here. And I'll make this white so you can see it. And the first thing we can do is change the radiuses of this heart. So this is going to be one side of the heart here. So the top left is going to be 5 pixels, the top right is going to be 5 pixels, and then these two at the bottom are going to be 0 pixels. Now we can hold down Option and copy this shape. I'm going to rotate this 90 degrees holding down Shift. Now I can align this here. You can see we have a nice heart. So now we'll select both of these shapes, rotate this 45 degrees for our heart shape. And the last thing we want to do is hit this join button, and now we have a heart icon. And I want to change the fill of this to be removed. I'm going to add a stroke, and this will be a white stroke. And let's try 2 pixels here. Now if I hold down Command and zoom out, we can see what that looks like and how this sits in relation to this image that we're going to have. So I can set this to the top right here, and then instead of using my X and Y values here to nudge this around, I can hold down Shift and just nudge this left 10 pixels and down 10 pixels, and it's sitting nicely now inside of this image. If you ever want to see the sizing or the relationship of sizing between two devices, you can select this heart, for example, and then just hold down Option, and you'll get these nice red indicators of how many pixels are between the edges of certain elements. And you can see here, because this shape is on subpixels, this nudged at 9.93 pixels. If you want to change that to be an even width, you can lock the proportions here, and let's just change this to maybe be 20 pixels wide. You can change that, and now let's try this again. Let's align this to the top right, hold down Shift, and left and down arrow. Now one last thing you might notice when we increase the size here, that doesn't increase the radius. What we should have done, if we undo this a little bit, is go to the scale tool, and now using the scale tool you can scale this up and down, and the radius will also scale with it. The way that we did it before is we actually used the move tool and tried scaling this, which resizes, but you can see those radiuses still stay at that 5 pixels. If you ever did accidentally resize it this way, and we can see that those radiuses haven't scaled, you can always double click inside of here, hold down Shift, and then just make a quick change, maybe set these to 10 pixels now, and you can see a nice rounded radius. So it's really nice to show you how to troubleshoot these things too, because it'll always come up as you're scaling things. You might wonder why the radiuses or the strokes aren't looking good. So there's a big difference between just resizing and using that scale tool. So now we know we want a 5-star rating system for our recipe. And under the shapes options, we have this star tool that's really handy. So I'm going to just click and drag, and I'll hold down Shift to lock my ratio. And I can drag this any size that I want, and later I can come in here, lock my proportions. I'm just going to make this 16 pixels wide here, and let's zoom in. So I can either keep this style that it's given me, but I have a few controls to change the style to how I want this to look. And one of those is changing the counts here. I can change this to 3, 4, 5, or 30 count. And I can also change the ratios. So if I want to give these points a little bit more bulge, I can do that with this ratio anchor. And then I have a radius control. And I'll just zoom in here a little bit to show you how this radius control works. So if I push this down, you can see I have an option for 1 or 2 pixel radius. And so that seems like a bit much. So if you want something that's more subtle than that, you can still go into this design panel, and I'll just type point to ratio just for a nice soft point here. And lastly, I want to change this fill to be a little bit lighter because this is the background of the star. And I'm going to zoom out, and holding down Option, I'll just copy this 4 times. And we know that this particular recipe is going to be 4.5 stars, so I'm going to select 4 of these stars, make them red. But how do we get half of this star to be red? Well, if you hold down Option and copy this, we've seen that we can combine shapes, but we can also subtract shapes. So we have this star, and we want to subtract a rectangle from the star. So I'm just going to drag a rectangle here. I'm going to snap it to the very center of this star. And I'm going to turn down the opacity here just to show you what's happening. So we have this rectangle that's overlaying this star. And so now when I select these 2 simple shapes, I can go in here and I can still use this union selection, but that just gives me one really weird shape. Or I can click in this down arrow and use subtract selection to subtract the rectangle from the star, which gives me a nice half star. If you'd like to see what the other options do, you can play around with that by just clicking undo, and we'll go and use exclude selection, which will exclude anything that's intersecting between the 2 selections. And we also have intersect. So anything that's intersecting, it will give us that right half of the star. So there's multiple ways that we can join or subtract shapes together. I'm just going to stick with this subtract selection here. And now I want to copy this style and paste the style on this star. And we see very easily we have this nice 4.5 stars. Now you can see here the star isn't quite aligning, and that's because instead of being a nice even 16 by 16 pixels, now that we cut it in half, it has a 7.3 by 13.85 pixels in here. So if we want to align this, we can still get past this by double clicking inside of here, and we'll just select both of these shapes inside of this join. And once we click both of the shapes, we can snap this to align with other shapes. It's just a weird quirk, but learning how to get past things like this will really help you save time in aligning things. Now we'll zoom out here to see the finished result. And we can select all of these shapes and use Command G to group all of them and just make sure they're centered here on the frame. Now these are just a few ways that we can use shapes. You see that we created a nice icon here, hamburger menu, search icon, and this heart here. Learning how to use the shapes tools and also the boolean tools that we see here give you a lot of power in creating the icons that you'd like. If you're following along from the previous video, feel free to use the same file as we continue designing. If you're just starting with this video, you can open up the drawing icons using the pen tool big file. So now we're going to show you how to create icons using the pen tool, and we'll do this under the recipe details frame. So before we do that, I'm just going to hold down Option and copy some of these items here. And this heart, we're also going to reuse this over here on the top right. So I'm going to nudge this over, make it 10 pixels by 10 pixels by using the arrow key and shift to nudge this over. So we have a nice starting, and now there are 2 icons down below here that we want to create. So I'm going to zoom into this area, and if I click on this recipe details frame, I'm going to just hide this layout grid for now as we design these icons. So these icons that we create are going to live inside of a circle, and these circles are each going to be 36 pixels. So we'll just create a 36 pixel circle. We'll fill this with red, and let's zoom in and let's create our first icon inside of here. So we can use this pen tool, and this pen tool we can just click certain areas to create straight lines. And if we want to close this shape, we just click on this last node here and it'll close the shape for us. So it's very simple to create straight shaped objects, and if I hit escape, it'll get me out of edit mode and I can delete this. But there are also times where we want to click and drag to create a curve. So I'll show you how this works here. Let's create a shopping bag, And we'll do that by clicking the pen tool, and I'm just going to click and drag certain areas here. And we have a bag shape, and I can click on this anchor here and just nudge this to make things even. Click this one, and that looks good. So now that I've done that, I also want to create a handle here, so I can click, and here I'll just click and drag, and it'll introduce us to some drag handles here. You can see here this drag handle is pushing this curve out to the left, this is pushing out to the right, and now I can click and end this. And if we ever want to change that, we can use this select tool right here, select this node, you can see these drag handles, and we can move these and change each one, and you can see how these are locked with the left and right handle. If I hold down Option, it'll break that link here so that I can drag this independently of the other one. So we can easily move these drag handles around and get the shape exactly how we want it. And once we're done using the pen tool, we've created a nice shopping bag icon. Now because I use strokes using the pen tool, if I decided to add a fill to this, it wouldn't look very good because you don't want the fill to be where the handle area is. So I'm going to hit Command Z or Control Z on the Windows, and I can still double click inside of here, and using this paint bucket tool, I can decide I want this area to be filled and not this area. So now that area is filled, I'm going to make this fill black, and I will hit done here, and we have our shopping bag. Last thing we need to do is put it inside of this circle, and it looks a little bit too big inside of the circle, so I'm going to constrain the proportions, and I'll just make this 16 pixels here. And that looks like a nice size. And now I want to make everything white, so I'm going to change this fill to be white, I'll change the stroke to be white, and the last thing I want to do is double click inside of here. I can still select these nodes that I used in the pen tool. I'll hold down Shift, select just the 4 corners here, and I'm going to add just a 1 pixel radius to make those corners curved inside of there. Now if we hold down Option and we copy this circle, there's one more icon we're going to create with the pen tool, and that's the chef's hat icon. It's the same icon that we created on the splash screen, but I just want to show you how to create this using the pen tool. So I like to create it outside of this box first, and then we can fit it in later. So I'm just going to create the bottom of the hat here, do something like this, and then we can just play around with these kind of bulges on the chef's hat. And right here you can see that I have a left drag handle and a right drag handle. So if I let go and I want a shape to come around here now, I actually can't do that unless I hold down Option and select this to break the symmetry between these drag handles. So I can say I want this curve to start out here, and you can see it's giving me a little preview of what that's going to look like. So here I can say I'll start here, and let's just click and drag. We'll hold down Option to break that symmetry again, and let's click and drag somewhere here and here. So you can see this hat is looking a little bit funky, but that's one really nice feature with this pen tool, is we can click on this move tool inside of our edit mode, and very easily we can just adjust these and make the curves really nice. And maybe this we want to move over here. And so within just a few seconds we can kind of clean up those curves here. And it really doesn't matter if it has a huge amount of symmetry, because this looks more organic if you just play around with different shapes here. Move this down here, bring this down. Starting to look pretty good. This looks a little bit flat. We'll decrease these a little bit. And then we want to select just these 2 nodes at the bottom, add a 2 pixel radius, bring this in, and something like that looks decent. So we have our chef's hat, and if I double click on this again to jump into edit mode, I'm just going to use the pen tool to create 2 more lines here, hit escape to end that, and 1 more right here, and again hit escape. And double click to end it. And we also want to jump into the advanced menus and cap this as rounded for these edges here. And we can now resize this to whatever size that we want and fit this inside of here. We'll make the stroke white. And now if you want to double click inside of this to go into edit mode again, the last thing we want to do is use this paint bucket tool to fill the inside of this with the color white. So now zooming out, we have a shopping icon and a preparation icon. So we'll just move these down here. If you want to design more free-form shapes, you can use the pencil tool. And you can find this tool here under this drop-down arrow next to the pen tool. You'll find this pencil tool. I'm just going to hold down Z and draw a rectangle here to just zoom into this area. So if you do have a Wacom tablet or something, I'm just using my mouse right now, so this text might be a little bit choppy, but you can kind of see how the pencil tool works here. If we just create some free-form cursive font, and the nice thing about this is, although the text is quite choppy, you can still jump into the move tool in here and double click on this shape, and you have access to all of these nodes. So I can select all of these, for example, and use this bend tool, and it'll try to help it become a little bit more curvy. Or I can select some of these nodes here, go under the vector menu, and delete and heal selection, and it'll make that a lot more curvy. I'm going to do the same thing over here, vector, delete and heal, so you can see how much cleaner your shapes can be if you just spend a little bit of time after you start out a little bit rough. So like this one, for example, delete and heal just makes that nice and curvy. Same thing here, delete and heal. And then from here you can still change things around. So it's a very nice combination to use that. Now if you want to use the pencil tool for tracing as well, then you can import images into your Figma file and then use the pencil tool to closely trace certain shapes. Now because I was using my mouse, this wasn't a great example of how to use the pencil tool. There is something that I love using with this pencil tool when I'm on my Mac, and that is the app called AstroPad and my iPad. So using my iPad, I can use it the same way as a Wacom tablet, or if you have a Wacom tablet with a pencil, you can do this same kind of thing, and you have more control over the look of this pencil shape. So here, very easily, I can just start creating some letters, and easily hit undo if things don't make it the first round. And here you can see that this first pass looks a lot cleaner. So you can still use those vector menus to heal selections, to smooth join some selections, and to clean this up even further. But from here I can easily choose these shapes and align them the way that I want, resize them the way that I want, and get this look exactly how I want it. Last thing I'm going to do here is change the stroke to white, and let's just add a 3 pixel fill here and just align this a little bit better. Something like that will work good. And if you don't want all of these layers here to mess up your layers panel, just hit Command G and everything will be selected here. Now we have a nice handmade font. To show you how text and the text properties work, we're going to be adding some text into the recipe details frame that we created in a previous video. If you haven't followed along and just jumped into this video, then you can find this file under the Chapter 4 folder in your exercise files. So to save time typing up some text, I have a recipe prime rib text file that you can find in the assets folder. And here, let's just open this up, and we can just refer to this as we crank along here. So the first thing we want to do is copy this text, prime rib roast, and let's just click on this T tool here. And I'm just going to click in the general area and paste this in, prime rib roast. Now we can jump back into our text edit folder. Let's copy this summary text here, Command C or Control C on a Windows. And next time we use the T key, we're going to click and drag for a certain box that we want to surround this text with. And I can hit Command V here and paste this text inside of here. And we can already see that this page is going to be quite a bit longer than the others. I'm going to drag this down here. And next, let's pull this down. I can copy some of this text by holding down Option. I'm just going to copy this down here, copy this down here. And this, I'm just going to call this shopping list. And I have this in all caps. And here I'm just going to put this lowercase, preparation. I'm going to show you why I do that later. Next, let's copy this over, holding down Option. We can drag, and let's jump back into our text file here. And I'll copy this, paste it in here, hold down Option, and copy this, and paste it in. So you could really type in anything that you want here. This is just some sample text to help you understand how the text properties works. So we have some one-liner text here. It's pretty simple. If we click in here, if we want to make this bold, for example, we can choose bold. We can change the size to, let's say, 18 pixels here. And we can change the center justification here very easily and just center this with this icon here. Now I can already see I want this text to be the same as this one. So what I can do here is I can right-click and copy this style and paste this style directly into here. And I have the same center justification 18-point bold here. I can center that as well. And now what do we do about these ingredients and the preparation? Well, the first thing I want to do is just change this, maybe 14 point here. And you can see this text is going beyond this bounding box here. So I can click and drag this to surround this, or I can click in this advanced menu and choose to auto resize the height based off of the contents in there. So now if I jump in here and I continue typing, that bounding box is going to resize. The next thing I can do here is add a paragraph line spacing. So this is your regular line height, and then this is your paragraph spacing. So I want to play with this a little bit. I'm just going to add 10 here. So I really like how this is turning out here. I can do the same thing, copy style, and paste style here. And that's looking really good. But notice here, we already have some paragraphs here that were entered in the text. So we can go through and delete this to keep it accurate as far as the spacing goes. And here we have the same problem with the bounding box. So we can go into the advanced menu. We're just going to auto resize the height here. And it looks like we need to resize our frame to be higher as well. So I'm going to hold down Command, zoom out, and I can resize that. So let's just zoom back in here, make sure that our text looks good. And I actually want to increase the line height here to be maybe 110%, just to give a tiny bit more spacing. Now I can select these different elements and just position them. We've got 20 pixels here. I'll probably put maybe 50 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 50 pixels in between these two. And same thing here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we've got 50 pixels. So we already added some text. We've got a really nice sizing here. I'm just going to use Option Command C as a shortcut to copy this style, and Option Command V to paste this in the prime rib roast. So we've got that styling down here, and now I want to show you why I didn't capitalize this, but I did capitalize this. So if you type things in caps, it's hard to have control over changing the capitalization later. But if you have this all lowercase here, I can quickly go into a bunch of text in my design file, and I can go and choose to transform this text to all uppercase here. So you have a lot more flexibility in what that font is going to look like as you design further out. And lastly, I'm going to copy the style here and paste it right here, and I think that's looking really good. Now I've already formatted all of this text, and rather than using the copy style, paste style a bunch of times, I might find out that later I want this text to not be completely black, but I want it to be a little bit lighter. So rather than clicking and trying to select everything in our artboard, we can click on one of these, go under Edit, and we can choose to select everything with the same style here. So selecting all of these three, and I can quickly go in here and say, now this style, I want the text to be just a tiny bit lighter. So something like this. And you can see that it changed that for these two, but this right here has something different. There's something different in the style, and that's the line spacing here. So Option Command C, Option Command V, and we have that same type of styling. What's really great though is you don't have to rely on one style for this entire text box field. So for example, as far as the amount of ingredients that we have here, I want this to be bold, and I want that to be totally black. So once I change that, you can definitely see the difference between the amount and the actual ingredient. So I can do the same thing here. Make this black and bold. And we can change that independent of the other characters in this bounding box. Our recipe design is finally starting to come to life, and to help this along, let's add some images here in the home screen and the recipe details screen. To find the images we want to import here, let's go to the shape tools and go to place image. And here we can find our assets folder, and inside the assets folder there are a few entree images. So the first one I want to import is this prime rib JPEG. So I can click open here, and now if I hover over any of these boxes, I can place this inside of that boxed area. So I want to place it right here, but I also want to place that same image right here. So instead of going into the shapes tools again and going to place image, I can right click on this and go to copy style, right click on this area and paste style. And the reason why that works is because this is a fill style where the image was placed as a fill. Now there may be times you want to adjust the image within this square. For example, if I click on this square here, you can see how things resize and it kind of fits to fill. But if I double click inside of here, what I want to have happen is I want to move this image actually inside of this rectangle. Well, I can't do that because this is an image fill and not an image mask. But there are a number of ways I can get around this. So if I move this over here, and this is 220 pixels, let's put 220 pixels tall, and I can go to my rectangle tool. I'm going to create a rectangle again here that's 220 pixels, and I'll fine tune this here, 220, and just snap this to the edge here. So I've recreated this, and if I hold down Option Command and the left bracket here, I can move this clear down in the layer scheme. So that's just a quick shortcut. Option Command, right bracket to bring it to the top, or left bracket to bring it to the bottom. That's the same as just dragging this around. Now I can click on this image, and if I click on this, hold down Shift and click on the image behind it, I can use this Use as Mask option here, and what that does is it sets this back rectangle here as just a mask. And so I can still click on this image and I can drag it around, I can resize it and manually place this exactly how I want inside of this area. It's maybe nice if you place in the image and things are cropped out that you want to appear in the image, you want to slide something down or place it just right. You can do it this way, but there's also another option. So I'm going to hit Command Z a few times. And just to get rid of this rectangle here. And now we're back to just this image. Again, if I double click, I can't really move this around within a cropped area. But a quicker way of doing this is actually going into this image menu here and choosing crop. And now that I have crop enabled, I can still click on this image here and maneuver it and even resize this. So those are just two ways of masking the image, either using a crop or masking that image with another shape. For the most part, you're probably just going to want to go in here and choose crop, but some areas where you may want to use the mask, for example, is if you have a circle, and I'm just going to tap the O keyboard shortcut and draw a circle right here, and I'm going to hold down Option and copy this image, and with Option Command right bracket I can bring this to the top. So things like this, you can't use that crop setting, so I can still shift click to select this circle with this image, and if I click on Use as Mask, now I have things masked within this circle or this shape. So there are multiple ways to do this, and some have better results than others in the application that you're using it. So I would just keep that in mind while you're using the crop or just the Use as Mask feature. Lastly, we have two other images here that we need to import, so I'm just going to go to my Assets folder here, and we'll import these two entree images. And you notice when I just drag them in from the Finder window, then they show up as really large, so I can just resize this down, and I can just shift select this image here, Use as Mask, move this around how I want it to look, and notice when I drag this image outside of the frame, it kind of places this in the background, so you need to be a little bit careful of that. Let's move this up here, and same thing here. I'm going to resize this a little bit. Import is rather really large. Okay, and we'll select these two and Use as Mask, and bring this over here. And you can see this went outside of the frame, so I can just Command X, click on the frame, Command V, and make sure it's pasted back in the frame here. Now that we have these images all masked, the last thing to do is add a drop shadow and a corner radius. So here I'm just going to have a radius of 5 pixels, and we'll do the same thing on these images here, 5 pixels. And let's click on Effects, Drop Shadow, and we're going to just turn this down to maybe 2 pixels here. And then here, we're going to add another drop shadow. And we'll add one more drop shadow. So we're adding 2 drop shadows here. One of them is a really sharp drop shadow, and then this one I want maybe 10 pixels and the blur to be 20 pixels. Something like this, and the shading to be 10%. So now we have all of our image masked. We have some nice shadow effects on those masked images, and everything's looking good. In a previous video, we created these icons like this hamburger menu and this spotlight here, and even these stars. But creating each little icon can sometimes be really cumbersome, and there are thousands of libraries out there that we can use inside of our design to get a design out quickly. You may also have some icons inside of Adobe Illustrator or as some images that you find on Google or other online resources, and those formats are very easy to drag and drop. So I want to show you a few ways that you can import some icons in here. And to do that, let's get started zooming into this home screen here. And now if we go into our Assets folder, we see that we have an icon here. Now we have this icon in 3 different formats. We have Adobe Illustrator, PNG, and SVG. Now, unfortunately right now, if I try to drag and drop this Adobe Illustrator file in here, you can see that this failed to import. So Figma doesn't recognize the Adobe Illustrator file completely, but if I double click and open this Adobe Illustrator file, we can see this comment vector graphic, and we can actually click Command C. We can go into Figma and click Command V, and this pastes the SVG directly inside of Figma. And this actually pastes this as a group, and if we drill down we can see this is actually a vector image. So the first thing we do when we import is just hold down Shift Command G a few times, and now we have this vector graphic all vectorized. If we zoom in here, we can still double click and edit this graphic exactly how we would if we created this inside of Figma. Another way that we can import this graphic is through a PNG. This is a portable network graphic. It's almost the same as an image, and we can see when we import this in, it's a raster graphic, meaning it's calculating the pixels here and behaves like an image instead of a vector graphic. The downside to something like this is you don't have the same editing capabilities as something like SVG or Adobe Illustrator files, where you can edit these and manipulate the files themselves. With the image, because this icon is an image, if we click inside of this area, we have some image editing controls, which doesn't work too well with just a black icon. And there are some ways to get around maybe the color of this. So we can still go into this image and add a fill, for example, and I can click inside of this and choose a solid fill. Let's say I want to choose the same red icon here. So I changed it to red, but what that did was it overlaid a red fill over top of the entire rectangle that this image is inside. I can hack my way into incorporating this red inside of this image by clicking on some of these overlay controls, and you can see that I have darken, multiply, color burn, and if I choose something like lighten, what that will do is apply this red on any dark element. So I can still change the color now, change this to any color that I want, but I have very basic editing controls. And now if I hold down Command and zoom out, you can see it still looks really decent as it's smaller, but if I want to use this as any larger size here, I'm going to get that pixelation. For the most part, you're going to want to edit all of your icons in SVG and find SVG files. And that brings us to our last file format. This is SVG. So if you're in a program like Adobe Illustrator, you can export any of your icons or graphics into SVG, and that behaves the same way as copying and pasting. So I still have this where I can change this color to red, and I can double click inside of here, and I have the same editing controls, and it's very handy. So I'm going to delete these, and I'll use this little comment icon, and we want to have two other icons. We want a heart and a timer. So in order to get those icons, there's a tool that's really handy, and this is a tool I use all the time. If you go to icons8.com, you can search for any kind of icon here, so I'll just search for heart, and you can see how many versions of the heart icon that we have. And same thing with a timer, so I'll just type in timer here and hit return, and I have multiple timers. Now Icons 8 is free. It's free to download these icons as a PNG, and remember that PNG is not very editable. So if you want SVG access, there's a paid version, and if you click see pricing here, we can see that it's $20 a month, and it gives you access to hundreds of thousands of graphics. Whether you get the free version or the paid version, they do have a desktop app, and this app is actually right here, this Icons 8 menu bar. So if I click on that, you can see that this pulls up right inside of my Mac. And if you have the free version, again, you only have this PNG option where you can drag and drop PNGs inside of here. But because I have a paid version, SVG, I can quickly search for icons like heart, and I can find something like this. I think that looks good. And now I want to find a timer. I can just type timer, and I like this one. I'm just going to drag and drop this inside, and you can see the difference between this PNG graphic and this SVG. Lastly, I'm going to select these two and just hold down Shift Command G to ungroup this a few times. And now I want the height of all of these to be the same, so I'm going to lock the proportions. I'm going to make the height, let's just say 20 pixels for now. And you can see even though the height is 20 pixels, they're not proportionally to scale. So what I like to do is match the height first, and then do some visual balance. So we probably want this to be somewhat smaller here. And if I was to focus more closely on matching the icons, I'd probably have a timer with a thinner weight on it, but this is good enough, I think. And do something like this. And we can change this fill to this red color here. And now let's zoom out. Let's set the comment over here, the heart here, and the timer over here. I'm just going to add a little bit of text, clicking the T key, and I'll just call this 5 hour. 685 and 107. So I'm just going to make sure that these are about 4 pixels away from the icon. And I just like to nudge with my arrow keys. Once I hold down Option, I can kind of see what that spacing looks like. And now I'll align this to the center and group these as one object so that I can align and distribute them evenly. Okay, now that we have this set up, I'm going to move this down to be a little bit more balanced. We have some nice icons here from Icons 8, from Adobe Illustrator, and ones that we've created. Last thing to do here is delete this PNG graphic, and we should be all set. Let's talk in more detail about color, and to start off with this video, I want to show you something really cool. Now, over the course of these videos, we've been using this same color red here throughout a lot of our artboards. So what happens when the primary colors need to change mid-design? Well, we can click on this icon here because we know that we use the same red as we've used across the rest of this project. And it's as easy as clicking this edit button right here. We can choose to select every object in this file that has the same fill. So now all of this is selected, and I can choose to change this fill to blue, and automatically our entire project now has this blue style guide incorporated. So that's one really quick way to test out new colors and new styles across many artboards in your project. I'm just going to click this, go back to select all with the same fill, and I'll choose to change this back to red here, and you can really change it to any color that you want. So that's just one powerful way of using some of these filters to select things. It's the same thing with stroke or different shadow effects. If you want to change the shadow effects across the project, that all works the same way. And now with this background color here that we created for the splash screen, that's this rectangle right here. We can see that we already added a color fill over top of an image fill, but we can add multiple color fills. So I can click on this plus icon, click on this little color thumbnail, and we have a number of options to add more color to the design. So I'm going to click on radial here, and we can see that we have a nice radial image with some anchor handles here to control the width of this radial and also the height here, or the size. And we can change the opacity here, so I'm going to change this to 30%. Let's try 60% here, just to make it a little bit brighter. And again, if I click in here, I can decide where the beginning and end point is of this. So maybe if I want to start inside this hat here, then I can have the end point something like this. And the width, I want it to be a little bit wider. And you can really just play around with this, and you can have a combination of different effects here. Now inside of the color panel itself, if we click on this fill, for example, we have a number of ways we can control the color. We have the color controls down here, and the saturation controls in here. We also have the hex value, so if you have any other colors that you want to copy from any other program like Adobe Illustrator or anywhere else, you can paste them as a hex value, or if they're RGB, you can paste those in here. You also have CSS values, so if you have CSS properties that you want to copy and paste in here to copy those colors, you can do that. And then the HSB values. So there are a number of ways that you can add, copy and paste colors or paste them outside of here into other projects. Another way we can use colors, let's go into this recipe details frame here, and let's look at just this prime rib roast title here. So I'm just going to zoom in, and let's say we spend a little bit trying to find a good color for these headers. I'm going to start out with this blue color here, and that looks decent, but it's not dark enough for me, so I'm just going to pull this down just a little bit. And we can see that looks like a really good color in contrast with this red, and we have the hex value here. So we could copy this hex value, and we can paste this anywhere else we want to copy that same color. So I can click inside of here and just do a quick Command V and enter, and we can paste it that way, but we know that we're going to reuse this throughout our project quite a bit. So if I want, I can scroll down here, and you can see that I have a few color choices. This is the document colors, so these are all the colors that have been used in the document, and I can just click here to copy that same color. Or I can choose personal colors. These are in my personal collection. Every time I open Figma, this is going to be the same palette of colors. And then I have a chef team colors. Now you remember in a previous video we created a new team for this recipes app. So by doing that, we can save this color inside of the color palette anywhere that we want. I'm going to save this inside of my personal colors as well because I really like this color. So now because it's in my personal colors, I can create a new file here. This file is completely separate from the other file we were working on, and if I just draw a rectangle for demo purposes, I can click on fill, go into my personal colors, and I still have that same color that I can reuse throughout multiple files now. You may also notice that we have an opacity control here, and when we dial this left and right, we can see that that changes here, so you have quick access to change the opacity here or down here. So I'm going to leave this at the dark blue. And one final way to grab and reuse color is if we have a color inside of an image, for example, that we want to reuse, we can't just double click in here and find out what the fill color is for an image. But let's say there's some green inside of here that we want to reuse inside of our project. Well, we can click on any piece of text, and I can hold down Control C and get this little eyedropper, and it'll show you the hex value here on the top right as you're moving along your mouse to the different colors. Or if you click on this color thumbnail, you can see that same control here, this eyedropper control. So I'm going to click on this eyedropper tool, and I'm going to choose to select a color somewhere around this area here. And so very quickly you can grab a color like that, and you can save that in your palette for later if you want to use it. I actually really like this blue color, so I'm going to click back in this color palette, and you can see when I clicked on it, I'm actually using the eyedropper tool still, but it gives me the same hex value. So those are a few ways you can use the color panel inside of your fill or inside of your stroke. In this video we're going to start designing a recipe completed screen, and by doing this we're going to illustrate some of the style effects that we can create on a pop-up overlay. Before we go through how to add styles, I want to go over here to the recipe details screen, and I want to copy some of these things over to recipe details complete. So I could just hover over these elements and copy and paste onto this artboard, or I can click on this artboard itself, and if I go to export here, I can click on this export, and I'll just export this at 2x, and we can see a preview here of what it's going to look like. And let's go ahead and export this as a PNG, and you can export this anywhere that you want. I'm going to export this on my desktop, and now I want to bring it back into the project, so I can click on the Shapes tools, click on Place Image, and if I jump into my desktop, you can see the recipe details here. I'll just click Open, and now I'll place this right inside of here, and we can scale it however we'd like. And here, this doesn't look exactly how we want it to, and remember, if we click on this image thumbnail, we can use this crop feature and just pull this down so we see the top of it. And all this is an image. Hit return here, and now let's click inside of here. I'm just going to nudge this over to make sure that we have the layering correct. And now we copied this image inside of here, And the reason why we did this is we want to create an overlay effect for a pop-up menu. Now to create the overlay color, we could click inside of here and add a fill that's a black solid fill, for example. And we can do that and turn the opacity down to 40% to show that it's overlaid. But if we do that, we can't add some effects to just this fill here. So instead of doing that, I'm going to click on this row and hit subtract. And now I'll create a rectangle, drag this over here, and I want to create that same black fill with just a subtle opacity here. And then one nice thing that I can do here is I can use this effects tool, and instead of a drop shadow, I actually want a background blur. So I want the background of anything behind here to be blurred out. And then I can change this to 20 pixels here to help it become really blurry. And now I can change the opacity here. Let's try 20% or 30%, and we can play with that as much as we want. In fact, I may choose to have this white here. So now we have a blurred white background, and if we drag this rectangle here, you can see what it's doing. It's blurring everything behind this rectangle shape, and I think that's looking really good. And now we want a pop-up window telling us that our recipe is completed. So we can create another rectangle here, and I'm just going to make it maybe 240 by 300 right now. And we'll bring this down to the center, and this may be resized as the content fits in it, and we're going to add new content in a future video. So now I'll just change this color to white. I will add a 5 pixel radius to all the corners. It's starting to look good, but we can see that there's very little or no contrast around the edges here. So one of the first things we want to do here is just add a subtle stroke. And then we want to jump into our effects once again. And this time we just want to add a subtle drop shadow. And 4 pixels looks good. 4 pixel blur, it's down 4 pixels, and 25% looks decent. Now we may want to add another shadow down below that's a lot more blurry, making this feel like it's popping out of the page quite a bit more. So if we want to do that, we can add another drop shadow inside of here. We can have this be 20 pixel blur, and we can see that that's really popping that off the page. And that's starting to look really good. I'm just going to decrease the opacity here. And so this is starting to look really good. But another thing we can do to really help pronounce this pop-up is draw a rectangle here to use as a shadow. And we'll just make this a little bit smaller than the rectangle here. And I'm just going to bring this down a few layers. There we go. And this rectangle can actually serve as a shadow. And to do that, we can change this color to black. And now if we jump into, and we can change the radius, let's change this to 30 pixels here. And now if we go into effects, instead of a background blur or a drop shadow or inner shadow, let's do a layer blur. So it's only blurring this actual layer. And here we want this blur to be 30 pixels. Let's start out at 30. And let's try maybe 50 pixels here. So that's looking really good. And then the actual opacity of this fill, let's change this to 15%. And you can hardly see that, so I'm going to try 30%. Sometimes it's just trying a few numbers to see what works. So that's starting to look decent here. And we can just fiddle around with the sizes and what exactly we like. And I'm going to change this to multiply. And let's just tweak this a little bit more to see what we like. Something like that should be good. So we have a nice completed screen here. We have some drop shadow effects, some layer blur effects, and some background blur effects here. And you can really play with a combination of these effects to get some really nice designs. The components feature is one of my favorite features inside of Figma, and you'll quickly understand why as we move along this video. So until now we've been creating a bunch of icons that are basic shapes inside of Figma. And one drawback from that is if I hold down Option and copy this over here, and I decide to change the style of this, for example, if I zoom in here and move this to be a little bit wider here, it doesn't change anywhere else. So I'll have to go in and copy and paste this across different frames. Now, if I want, I can choose a lot of these icons here. I'm going to name this to button menu, and I'll name this to button search. And now I can click on any of these elements and click on this create component. And now if I go to my components panel, you can see I have these two components here, and I can reuse these anywhere that I want. And that's really handy, so I can drag and drop this on any frames that I want. And now if I click on this master component and I change anything that I want, the color or anything else, it changes everywhere that I have those copied. I'm going to undo this, and we'll remove those. And I'll show you a more powerful way of using components. For example, we have this 5-star rating system. So what if we had a component that we can reuse and we can change this 5 stars to be 1.5 stars, 2.5 stars, or whatever. So first thing I'm going to do is click and ungroup all of these. And what I want is I want an unfilled star. So I'm going to choose this star here. And then I want a filled star. So I'll choose this star and I'll overlay this. And I want to move this up inside of my layers panel. I want to move this just up above the other one. So now we have a light gray star and then a red star. And I'm going to just call this star hyphen unfilled. And then I'll call this one star hyphen filled. Now I'll align these. And the last one that we have here, I'm going to make sure this is clear up at the top here in the layer system. So if I scroll up here, let's bring this to the top of the home page, and I'm going to align this. And remember, this doesn't align too well now that it's on subpixel, so I can still double click inside of here and just select these two shapes underneath this, and I'll align that to snap. And then I will call this star hyphen half hyphen filled. So we have the 3 versions of this star that we're always going to need: fully filled, unfilled, and a half filled. So I can select these objects here, and let's just move this up to make sure that their layers are close to each other. And now that I've done this, I have my naming scheme good. In fact, I have some capital letters here. I'm just going to change this to be all lowercase, just for uniformity. It really doesn't matter. But I'm going to click on these 3 layers now, and I'll click Create Component. And I can call this master component Star. So now if I copy this 5 times, I'm going to hold down Option and copy this 5 different times. These child components have layer overrides. So I can click on any of these stars here, and I can choose to hide the half-filled icon and also the filled icon right here. So now we have this unfilled icon. I can do the same thing here, hide these 2 layers. Let's say this is 2.5 stars. So here I want to keep this half star filled visible, but I want to remove this star filled underneath it, and we have 2.5 stars. Now I can delete these guys here. These are just simple shapes. And I have these 5 child components. And now I can center these here in the center of this artboard. And I'll actually create another component here. And the reason why I didn't include this master component inside of here is because you can't nest master components inside of other components. You have to use child components. So you create one master component, and then let's copy all of these and click Create Component again. And I'm going to call this 5 stars. So this is a new master component. I'm going to zoom out, and we can just place this master component outside of the frame here because we don't want to show it inside of our design. Now I can delete this 5-star system over here and copy this master component, hold down Option, and I'll copy this over here. And now the really nice thing is this is a child component, but I can still drill down inside of here and choose this star here in the middle. I'm going to make this filled, and I can make this one here half filled, so we can change it very quickly. But now if we go in here and decide to give this a little bit more spacing, I can still click on each of these objects and I can just nudge this around, and you can see over to the right this is also being updated. So I'm changing this one master component here, and the spacing is applied over here. If I ever want to change the color of this star here, of the half star and the full star here, I can just select both of these components. So I'll choose star half filled and star filled, and I'll decide maybe I want these to be yellow. So as soon as I change that to be yellow or gold, I can now zoom out and everything is changed here. So very easily and very quickly we created components within components, and we can do the same thing with these guys here. So if I click and ungroup these, Shift Command G to ungroup, or you can right click inside of different areas here and just choose ungroup. Now I want to create one component with all of these objects. So all I have to do is bring these down here and just align them to the center of each other. And I'm going to name these after I ungroup them all the way. Icon comment. And I'll move these out of the way so I can see which one I'm renaming. So this is the icon timer, and this is the icon heart. Now we can grab all three of these and align in the middle and the center. And because we have all of these now, we can choose to create component. And let's just call these icons. And now if we hold down Option, we can move this. And if we click this arrow in the Layers panel now, we can decide that we want to only show the timer here. We'll hold down Option and drag over here. And here we want to show the heart. And let's drag one more time. And here we want to show the comment. So now at any time with this master component, you can resize this, you can move this around here in the components area, and you can change the styling, replace them, and it's a great way to organize your icons this way so that you can toggle on and off within this layers panel. Now we can see that we have this master component icons, and we also have this master component, which is the star. And we don't really want this inside of our frames because we're only using the child components here. So we can click on this page view and click new page, and this is where I like to create a page called symbols. And if I click back to page 1, I can click and drag here and just right click and move this to symbols here. Now if I ever want to see where the master component is to edit this, I can right click inside of here and click Go to Master Component, and it jumps right to the symbol page and tells me here's where it is. And now if I click on this and I add a stroke, for example, and I know that looks really ugly, but just for demo purposes, let's go back to the page 1, and we can see that that changed here as well. So I'm going to right click, go back to Master Component, and if I hold down Command, I can go into this group and remove this stroke here. We'll go back into page 1, and we can see that that's updated. So I would recommend storing your master components inside of the symbols, or you can name this components to match what they really are. I actually named them symbols because I'm used to Sketch app where the components have a different name, and that is symbols. So now this is renamed to components. We have all of these icons here set up as components. These are set up as components. And we can do the same thing here. This could be one component, or they could be two. So we can click on here, click Create Component, and we can name this Shopping, create this component, and Preparation. Now the last component we want to create is this heart button. So I'm going to call this button heart. and we'll click create component here. Now there are times that this heart's going to be filled or unfilled. So now that we've created a component, I'm going to zoom into here. And this is the master component, but we can still click inside of here. We can see that we have a button heart inside of this master component. I'm just going to name this heart outline. And if I use Command C and Command V to paste this, I'm going to name this one heart filled. And the only thing I'm going to change here, if I double click on this icon, you can see I have these two shapes that I merged. I actually want to bake this in, so if I click on this heart filled here, I'm going to go to Object and Flatten Selection, and that will bake everything as one shape. And now I can click inside of here, add a white fill, and even remove the stroke here. So we have one filled heart and one outlined heart. And anywhere we have this heart saved, we can always toggle that on and off using these layers. This is also a basic shape, so we want to delete this. We can click on this master component here, and again hold down Option and copy this over here, and it creates a child component. And again now, we can change the layering inside of here. We can change this to be filled if we want, and this to be unfilled. And because it's the same component, if you ever change the color or style in the master section, it'll also change here. Now let's scroll down here and we'll see this preparation window here. If I just squeeze this down a little bit to give some room over here, I actually want to have each preparation area, I want to have an icon here that represents the steps. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'll show you how to create some nice components for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is click O for this ellipse, and I'll just create a 20 pixel by 20 pixel circle here, and I actually want this color to be the same color as that unfilled star. So I can come back over here, I can double click inside of here, and if I choose this star unfilled, I'll right click and copy style. I'll come down here, right click, and paste the style. So that looks good. And I'm going to add some text inside of this. So this text is just going to say 1. And we're using Roboto here. You can use whatever font that you want, but I'm going to make this bold here. And I'll create this to be red text. And if I zoom inside of here now, I'm going to move this to be centered. And I'll just change the width of this and the height of this to match. And I'm going to sit this text right in the center of this circle. So we have 1, and I can group this and call this step number. And then I want to hold down Option and copy this, and let's say this step is completed. Well, now we want to double click in here until we select this circle here, or this ellipse. And let's fill this color to be red. And I'm going to remove this text. And now I want to create a check mark icon. So very easily I can use this pen tool, and I'll just click and create a check mark. Something like this will be good. And I want the stroke to be 2 pixels. And now I want to cap the ends. I want them to be rounded. I'm going to change the color here to be white. Hit escape a few times. I accidentally created a new shape out here. I'm going to delete. Okay, so we have that check mark. I'm going to just balance this, center it here in the circle. And sometimes because it's a little bit offset, you kind of have to eyeball it. But I'm going to hold down Shift and let's just align this horizontally. So we have this step completed. So now I'm going to drag this vector shape into this other step number group. Instead of naming this step number, I'm going to do step complete. Okay, so now we have our step number and our step complete. We can do the same thing where we align this here to the top. We're going to select both of these and we're going to create a component, and we'll just call this icon steps. Now because this is a master component, I'm going to hold down Option and drag this down to create a child component. And then again, I'm going to right click and move the master component to the page components. And now I can use all these child components. I'm going to click inside of here, remove step complete, and now I just have this step number. But one thing that's really nice is I can hold down Option and copy this a few times, and I can still go inside here in this text, and if I double click a few times, I can change the number here to 1, 2, 3, and watch this. If we change this to step 22, we see that there's not enough padding around here, and we've already committed to our design here, and it's going to take a lot of work to go in here and change all the sizes here of the fonts to kind of help this padding to be correct. But because we created components, we can still right click and jump to master component, so we can see that the master component hasn't changed. If we double click inside of here and we choose this group, I'm going to move this away, and you can still see where it says 1, so that text that we changed is just overridden in those child components. It's not going to change here. But just for this master component, I'm going to hide this, and now I can click on this font inside of the master component, and I can choose to resize this to 12, and maybe let's try 10 here. So we resize this to 10. I can jump back into my pages, and you can see it fits a lot nicer. Now we could have clicked inside of just this number inside of here. If we wanted this text to be larger and just this text to be smaller, we can click inside of here and change this to even be 48 pixels, for example. That's way too large. I'm going to choose 14 pixels. And you can see that this changed and none of these changed. That's because if you change anything in a child component, that's actually going to override that change. And when you change the master component now, if you change the size, it'll change the size of all of these, but it won't change this because you've overridden that size. If you want to ever change this back, you can double click inside of this text area, and you can go back into this little button here, this instance button, and you can choose to reset all overrides. So right now we overrode the name, so we typed in 22, and that's different than the master component. We overrode the text, we overrode the text style, so we can choose to not reset the text, but we can reset the style, and that brings it back down, and we could reset the name if we wanted, but I'm just going to leave that. And I can see that these are sitting a little bit high to the circle, so I'm going to right click and go to master component again, and if I double click on this text, let's just have this sit down just a little bit, something like this, and let's jump back into our pages and see if that looks better. I think that looks a little bit better here. So now going down the list, I'm going to just change this to 4. And let's say that these steps are complete here. So I'm just going to mark this as complete. And the first few steps we'll just say are complete here. And we'll align this here with the top of this text. And let's say it's all but the last is complete. And these are a little bit too many steps. So I know if you try to follow this recipe, you're probably going to screw up because I'm going to delete a bunch of mid text inside of here, but this is just for visual representation. And I don't want the artboard to be that long, so I'm just changing this, just deleting a little bit of these steps. So let's just have, 3 or 4 steps here. So 3 of them are completed, and this 4th one is not. Now I want to make sure things are lined up correctly, so I'm going to hold down Option. You can see there's 31 pixels here. I actually want to nudge this so there's only 20 pixels here. And then I want 10 pixels to be in between here. So nudge this 1, 2, hold down Shift and nudge it once. And now we have 10 pixels. And then I want this side to be 20 pixels, so I'm going to hold down Command and nudge this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so everything looks good. And we have our steps. Now let's zoom out here and take a look at this. This is all looking really good now. And to match the alignment here, like this shows 14 by 14. I'm just going to line this here with the edge here. And we'll nudge this, holding down Command, left arrow, and Command Shift, left arrow once more. So we have a 20 by 20. So we can see this is aligned really good. And I'm going to align these with the edges here. So those are components. We've now converted all of our icons to components here, and they're ready to be reused throughout all of the other designs. For example, I'm just going to hold down Option here, and I'll just move this over here because I know we're going to use the same kind of 5-star scheme inside of this design in the future. Again, now if we click on this Components panel, you can see all of our components here. We have 6 components on our home page, and we have 3 components here under the Components background. In most cases nowadays, we're designing for multiple device screens, and this starts to become a challenge translating how the paddings and margins and layout will look to the developers as they're developing these screens for the different device sizes. Well, Figma has a really nice tool to help this become much easier to export multiple screen sizes and not having to design for multiple screens, but using constraints so you can stretch this frame and see exactly what it's going to look like at that size. And you'll notice when I stretch this right now, things look a little bit broken and they're not exactly resizing the right way or the way that you would intend. So I'm going to click Command Z, and that's what we're going to do is we're going to set up this frame here to be responsive. We're going to set up the constraints for all of these elements. Now before we do that, I'm going to just zoom into these 2 artboards here, and I want to just hold down Option and copy some elements over here to kind of complete this design. Move this down here, and have this centered. And if we were really focusing on this design, I would get the padding exactly right and the spacing, but just to save some time, I'm just going to eyeball this, and we can work on that a little bit later. Now I'm going to add just a few more elements here. I'm going to hold down Option and copy this up here to be aligned with the center of these icons. I'm going to call this Popular Recipes, and make this the same red color here, and go down once more. We'll call this Entrees over here, Appetizers. Hold down Option once more and call this Dessert, and I want these all to be a subtle gray here, and we'll probably make this 13 point and regular. And because this is the one that is selected right now, I'm going to make this black and medium. And using the L key, I'm going to draw a line just below this. And let's make this 2 pixels, and let's cap off the ends with a rounded end here. I'm just going to give this, going to center this. Command G to group it and center it with the artboard, and then I'll ungroup it here. Shift Command G, and I'll give these 30 pixels in between each. And that's just nudging these, holding down the Shift and the arrow keys. So now if I hold down Option, you can see that there's 30 pixels in between, and we can easily see the entrees are selected. Just changing the sizing and the padding here. It really doesn't matter too much. You can move this around however you want. And I think the last thing I want to do is hold down Command G and center this with the artboard, Shift Command G to ungroup. So now we have this design near completed, and we want to make this responsive. So the first thing we do is test this out. We can see that things are broken here. So going down one by one, let's just fix this top area right here. So we know we want this icon to be constrained to the top left of this frame. So now when we try this, you can see that's exactly what we want it to do here. We're going to hit Command Z to resize this back to where it was, and now this Popular Recipes, we want to center this with the frame, and instead of the left top, we want this to just be centered, and we want it to sit at the top. And sitting at the top means if I scale this down, it's just going to stay there. If I change this to sit at the center, what it's going to do is center this where it's at, here between the top and the bottom. So let's change this back to top center, and then this guy right here is going to be right top. So now we have our header area behaving exactly how it should, and Now we have to deal with these guys. So if I want to apply a constraint to everything, I can select all of these layers and click Command G or Control G on the windows. And I'm going to name this categories. And now I want this also to be centered and sit at the top. So now we have this group as centered, and we can resize this, and we can see that it is centering each element on the artboard, but that's not exactly what we want. It's centering relative to this frame, but if we want to create a new frame around this, we chose to group this, and we named this group category, but let's convert this group to its own frame, and this is what we call a frame within a frame, so that we can set the constraints only within this frame, and it's independent of what we set in this frame. So I'm going to click on this group, and you can see that it's a group here, but if I can change this to a frame instantly by clicking on frame right here. And so now this is its own frame, and these objects are going to be centered within this frame itself, not within this frame. So now we have a left top constraint here. We're going to center this frame for the top and center, and now when we stretch this, we can see that's precisely what we want to have happen there. Command Z. And now we're working our way up to these images here, so I can group these items, Command G, because we want these to stay within each other, and I want this to be center top, and we can see that that behaves correctly. And now let's move these images inside of that same group. So we have this group up here. I'm going to select both of these with Option Command and right bracket. I'm going to move these to the top near this other one. So now we have these two masked groups, and this group I'm going to move to the top as well. And holding down Command and selecting both of these, I'm just going to move them inside of this group here. So now we have all of these grouped. And same thing, center top. And again, we have to convert this into its own frame. So now that's working correctly. And we have this, a component works the same way as a frame, where we can just choose to create this at the top center, and it's not going to stretch like a group does. Now I can resize this, that always stays centered. And the same thing over here, so you can select multiple things at once if you know they're going to have the same alignment properties. And I'm just going to make sure that this is already centered on the artboard here. There we go. And again, center top. And these are the last things here. So first of all, just making sure that it has the right spacing that you want initially. That's probably pretty good. We'll move these down just a tiny bit. And now we can select all of these, Command G to group, change this group into a frame, and let's center this. And the last thing with this text, we actually want this to be pinned to the left and right. So we want it to always be 20 pixels on the left, 20 pixels on the right. And same thing here, we can actually stretch this here, depending on if the text increases or decreases. We still want it to have 20 pixels on the left and right, so we're going to choose left and right here. And now check this out. This is for the iPhone 8. If we want to look at the 8 Plus, we can look at that very easily. Look at the iPhone 5S, or if we have the Galaxy Note or whatever, we can change the size, and very easily your developers can see exactly what you intend this to look like during development for multiple screen sizes. You can also change the width here, so 375, and you have the option here, because it's turned into a frame, I can decide I want to see what it looks like on the Galaxy S8. That changes proportionally, and the same thing, I can choose maybe a 7-inch tablet. What does that look like here? So you can see that you have that nice width for the 7-inch tablet. I'm going to change this back to the iPhone 8. So once you get the hang of setting up constraints, it's just a matter of testing things once you set them up, making sure that things are flowing correctly. And once you really do get the hang of this, it takes probably 2 minutes to convert something like this into a responsive design. So before we move into the next video, I would like you to go through this artboard here. This may be a little bit simpler to set some things like this up. I'm going to just center this. But just go through here and just set the constraints here for this frame. And again, you can always test it out by just stretching things. You can already see that some things are broken, like this image here. So if I hit undo, this image would just be pinned left to right, or left and right. And we can see that now that's fixed. So just go through and change some of those things on your own and see if you can get this to behave and perform the way that you'd like. Because Figma's design files live on the cloud, you don't have the conventional save features that you do in normal local files. You can click on File and Export here to export certain files, but for the most part, once the Figma file lives inside of your Figma instance and you have collaborators designing with you, everything is just saved instantly. Now there may be times you want to jump back inside of your history and find a certain way that you may have styled something that you want to retain, and that's where versioning control comes in with Figma. So we have this file here, version control, and to go into your version control, just click on this little arrow here right next to the file name, and you can see show version history. So if I click on here, you can see a few snapshots of time where I've designed this, and you may not see the same version history, and that's because once I click File, Export to export this into the exercise files, then it suppresses or it hides all of these versions and you only get the latest state. These versions only pertain to after you load this into Figma and you begin designing with it. So very easily I can click and see what this looks like at 12:26 p.m. or 10:54 p.m. or December 17th, for example. So you can click in and see the progress here, and if there's something that you like within this design, you can duplicate this instance. So duplicate this file to show just this instance, and you can copy and paste some things back and forth, or you can restore the file. If you say this is the latest version that I don't like what I've done in the last hour, you can change that and just restore this actual file to this version, and then again you can see the current version here. So that's versioning history, and if you notice the notes down here, you have a 30-day version history, and if you want more than that, you'll have to upgrade to the paid program. Once you're done checking this out, you can click back to editing and begin editing where you left off. In Chapter 4, we went over working with content, and that was working with frames, shapes, icons, and a number of the different tools to apply those to our design. So now that we have some well-rounded knowledge on how the tools work, there are still some screens left to be designed here, and to apply the knowledge we gained in the previous chapters into completing our design. So if you want, you can go through these videos with me in completing these designs, or you can open up this chef recipe drawing PNG located in your assets folder and design each one of these screens based off of the sketches that you see here. Either way is fine with me, but if you want to follow along, I'm just going to get started with this first video creating a slide out menu here in the menus frame. So the first thing I want to do inside of here is create a rectangle using the R key for a shortcut, and I'll just create this at 320 pixels, and I'm going to use the same red color that we've been using in previous videos. And now that we have this component set up, I can go into the components panel here and drag and drop this button menu somewhere here, and I can even align it with this one, holding down shift and selecting. I can align this to the top and then make sure that this has 20 pixels here against the edge of this rectangle. That'll match the same 20 pixels here. Now very quickly I'm going to add some text, so I'll just use the T keyboard command, and I'm just going to start typing these in. Going to set this to left justify, Okay, so we have our 4 menu items. I'm going to quickly style this with white text. And under the advanced menu, I want to transform my text to uppercase. And I want the paragraph height to be 30 pixels here. And this text can actually be, let's try 20 pixels right here. So that's looking pretty decent. Maybe I'll have medium. And now I'll align this with the edge and hold down Shift and the right arrow 2 times or 3 times. So we have our menu here. And I also want to hit the L key for align. And I'll just draw a line that's 30 pixels here. And I'll make this stroke white. And this can probably be a 5 pixel stroke with the edges rounded. So I'm going to cap this with a round cap. And we can see here we are in popular recipes. Now we want to hold down Option and copy this text down here. I'm just going to add some more text for the user login. Harry Truman. And if I tap the O key for ellipse, I can create a 46 pixel circle. Just going to dial that in here because I couldn't get it correct the first time. And now that I have this circle selected, I'm going to go in and fill this with an image. It's going to ask me to choose the image, and I'm going to go into my assets folder here, and we can see this avatar.png. I'm going to just go ahead and open this up here. And we have Harry Truman profile image here. So you can see very quickly we have our menu all designed and set up. And in the next video we're going to finish our pop-up screen for the completed recipe. In this video we're going to complete our on-screen overlay screen. This is the screen that tells them you did it, let your friends know about it, or leave a review. So this screen will pop up as soon as they click on this last step here, finalizing their preparation. And that's what we have here. So in a previous video, under the Styles video, we already learned how to overlay some of these layers here. So we have a rectangle with a nice background blur. We have this is just an image of this artboard here. So we exported the image out, we imported it back into here, and now we have these 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. So it's an image, this blurred rectangle, and then we have this pop-up overlay rectangle with some drop shadows, and we have this component that we created in an earlier video too. So let's complete the rest of this here. First off, we need to add some text, and the cool thing about previous artboards and some designs is I can hold down Option and just copy some of these things if I know it's going to be similar to the same style. So I can just type here, you did it, and right here I'll just use the same text, let your friends know about it. And here it's a little bit wider than I'd like, so I can just change that here. And holding down Shift, I can nudge this 10 pixels. Shift Command, left arrow. I can resize this to be 10 pixels. So now we have 4 icons. That's the Google Plus icon, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram icon. And if you want, you can use any icons that you find online for Google Plus, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Or if you go into your assets folder, we have 4 SVG icons already for Google, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So if you want to just use these, let's just hold down Shift to select all of these. And I'm just going to drag these in here. And we can see that they are all inserted now. I want to lock the proportions, and let's just make the height of each one of these 20 pixels right now. And I can already see that's a little bit big. So I'm going to change this to 12 pixels, and that looks a little bit better. Now I can align these, and the first thing I want to do with these icons here is wrap them in their own little circle. So tapping the O key and creating a 20 pixel by 20 pixel circle. I can make this circle red, and now we'll go in here and we'll create all of these to be white. We'll center these and bring them over here. And if I zoom in here, I can kind of see what's going on with this. Google Plus is a little bit large, so I'm going to scale this down a little bit. The width will probably make 16 pixels. And we can play around with this a little bit later on too if they're too unbalanced. So we'll start right here. And the last thing here, this Facebook icon, we want to change this a little bit because we only want this F. We don't want this bounding box. So we can double click inside of here a few times, and let's look at our layers panel. You can see that this is grouped. There's an F, and then there's a rounded rectangle. So I'm just going to delete this rounded rectangle here, and now we only have this F. So now I can bring this F over here and resize this. I know it's looking a little bit messy right now. If we want, we can hide some of these other ones here as we look at this F. That's a lot better. And now that we have all of these selected, I'm just going to clean up these layers because it shows them all grouped. So let's just select all of these groups holding down Shift. And I'm going to select Shift Command G. And now, one more time, Shift Command G. And I'll just name this Social Twitter, Social Instagram, Social Google Plus, Social Facebook. And now I can select this circle and these other social icons. And you see sometimes, it actually didn't put this in the same frame as the circle. Sometimes it's a little bit weird like that. So we want to drag this back down where the circle is. I'm going to hold down Command and select this circle as well. And we'll just group everything by creating a component. And we're going to call this the social component. Now again, we're going to hold down Option and copy this, and then I'll right click and move this to the components page. And now we have this child component. This is where we want to start off with the Google Plus icon. Now we'll hold down Option 3 more times and copy this. And this one we want to be Facebook. Here we want it to be Instagram. And here, have this be Twitter. So we've done a good job already, but you can still see this is quite large compared to the circle. So let's right click on one of these and we'll go to the master component. And just jumping inside of here, I'm going to hide each one and just go ahead and resize some of these things using the scale tool. Might help. Something like that I think will look good. Let's center that in the artboard. This Google Plus. Bring that down a little bit more. Instagram. Scale that a little bit. Something like this. And same thing with Twitter. And let's center that. We can jump back into our pages, our page 1, and see how that all looks. And one thing I forgot to do, I'm going to jump back into components, is unhide the rest of these. Jump back in here, and that looks far more balanced. Now the last thing I want to do is add some text here to leave a review. And now we want to center all of these things, and watch when I click to drag a drag handle to select everything, I'm actually dragging these things behind. So this is where the lock layers will come in really handy. These two layers right here I want to lock. Now I can click and drag to select everything here, except for these circles. Hold down Shift and just click to deselect those. And now I can align horizontal centers here, and I'll align everything here to the frame. And also the center of the frame right here. Now I can start to align some of these items. So I could just choose to add 10 pixels between each of these icons. So I'll butt them right next to each other, hold down Shift and the right arrow key, butt this next to the G, Shift, right arrow key. Alright, so now let's center this with the overlay, and let's put a nice 20 pixels in between there, and 0 pixels in between here. And 1, 2, 3, that's 20 pixels. I'm going to hold down Shift and one more, I'm going to have that 30 pixels here. And then down here, I'm going to add 30 pixels here. And 10 pixels right here. And when you're asking someone to leave a review here, you want this all to be unfilled. So because this is a component, I can choose this first star to hide this filled layer. I'm going to also hide this star. Something here. Something here. And now it's blank and ready for them to leave a review. Last thing I want to do is resize this. So I want this to also have 30 pixels between the bottom of this pop-up window and the bottom of these stars. So we can see it's 26 pixels right here. So again, I can just hold down Command to resize instead of move. And I'll tap this down arrow 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have a nice 30 pixels here and 30 pixels here. I'll move this shadow to be centered again. And now I can select everything here, hit Command G to group it, and just make sure that this is centered with the frame that it's inside. The last thing I want to do is add an X right here, so I'll just quickly draw one. We'll have this 2 pixels here, have this rounded, and now I'll select this line, click Command C, Command V, and quickly rotate. And for some reason when you rotate, it's rotating on this left axis, which is a little bit weird, but I can just nudge this using the arrow keys to make it straight. I just noticed that when I was working with lines, they behave a little bit unpredictably, but now that I have this, I can click on this union selection, and now I have one nice fill. I'll scroll out, and I want to rotate this to 45 degrees. And now I can go into Object and flatten this selection and change this to be a nice even size. We'll do 10 pixel by 10 pixel. And we'll just make this, we hold down Shift and nudge this left once and right once. It'll just sit 10 pixels away from the edge there. So now we have a nice pop-up menu. Says you did it, they can leave a review, let their friends know, or tap this X and jump back into the recipe. Now I'm going to hit 0 to zoom out 100% to see how that looks. And it looks really good to me, but sometimes you have some artifacts. There's this edge right here that looks like this. The edge of this isn't hitting the top, even though it is. So sometimes if you get that, it doesn't hurt to grab this shape inside of here and just move it up past the box just to make sure that you have everything filled inside of here. So this is how you illustrate an overlay here. You have to duplicate the image and then place some objects above this. Now that we have the overlay designed, we want to design the comment section inside of the recipe details screen here. So you can feel free to design this on your own and match this with what I am doing. And if you want to do that, just pause this video and crank away at the design, and then you can resume this video and see how it closely matches with what I'm talking about here. But if you want to follow along, feel free to do so as well. So let's scroll down here. We're going to jump into the recipe details frame right here. We can scroll down here, and we want a comment section. So I know that I can copy something like this. I'm going to just copy this down, and I'm going to name this comments. And we know we don't want this same component here. So if I don't want to ruin this component, I can right click and detach instance. So now this is no longer a component. It's not related to this master component. And I can hold down Shift Command G, and I can delete this vector image and place in a comment image. So if I go into my components panel here, you can see that I've already created some icons here as a component. So I can click and drag this into my artboard here. And now if I go back into layers, I only want this comment icon, so I'm going to hide these two. And I have that comment. And you can do this a number of ways, but I'm just going to delete this icon here. I'm going to use this child component and bring this inside of here. And you can see that I want this to match the same exact design as in this artboard to the left of it here. But the color needs to change, so sometimes there are exceptions to your design just for one-time instances, and that's where child components really come in handy with overrides. So I can double click on this layer here, and I can create this to be white, and if you see when I double click inside of here, there's this override symbol that's telling me I'm overriding the fill, and I can always reset that to the master component if I want, or just change this and override it just this one time. So now I'm going to bring that inside of my circle, and I can create this as its own component or master component as well, and reuse throughout other areas if I'd like. So now I'm going to hit the E keyboard shortcut and just a 46 by 46 pixel avatar. And here I'm going to hit the T key and just add some text real quick. So I'm going to add Tom Klein. He's a user of our app. And I'm going to make this 13 pixels here and just regular. And if I want to match this color of this font, I can do it a few ways, but I'm just going to quickly use this eyedropper tool and select something here. And you can see that I got barely off where I wanted to select, so there we go. And I can say this prime rib roast was amazing. And it is all caps because under my advanced menu, I have that transform control on, but I'm going to toggle this off. And maybe I want to have this italics as well. And the date that he commented was 7.01.2017. And I'm going to have this medium just like that. Now I can quickly set some sizes here. Just align this with the base of this. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just nudge this around to your liking. And this is 26 pixels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have that 20 pixels now, 10 pixels, 10 pixels. So that's looking pretty good. And now I can click on this circle. I'm going to fill this with an image. And I can click on choose image. And I have a few other avatar images. So I'm going to click on avatar 2. And this is starting to look really good. So maybe I'll just save this as a component in itself. So I'm going to click create component. And now this is a master component. And if I click inside of here, I can use this component frame to resize around. You can see that it's doing some weird stuff. So I'm going to hit Command Z. I'm going to set some constraints in this component just real quick. So I know that this is always going to be constrained to the left and the top. This is also, in fact, all of these are going to be constrained to the left top. And then this one here, I can constrain this to the left and right so it grows as I grow this frame here. So I'm going to hit the edge of this at 20, and you can see this is now behaving the way I want it. And now I can hold down Option on this component, create a child component here, and I can override the text here, name this Sally Parker. And you see what it did here, I had the text aligned to the center, so I can go to the master component here and say I want this to align to the left actually, and that changes automatically. And now I notice that this text here is running into this text, so I probably want to add more spacing here. So I can hold down Shift, and maybe I'll do something like that. I'm going to fix my spelling here, and I'm going to just type in a comment for Sally Parker, Okay, so this one's a little bit lengthier, but we can see that everything adjusted the right way, and it looks really good. And lastly, we can do a fill override as well. So I can click on this image and choose a new image. I'm going to choose Avatar 3 under our Assets folder, and go ahead and change that. And even though this is a master component, if I ever want to change this text here to be Roboto, medium, black, anything else, I can change that very easily. In fact, a good example of this, if I move this down, is I know that I want a 5-star rating system inside of here. And we know we already have that inside of our component, so I'm going to click under Components here, go to my 5-star system, and I can drag this inside of this component actually. So now that that's dragged inside of there, I'm going to move the rest of these guys down, holding down Shift. You can see how everything's just moving in place. I'm going to bring that to the top here. And I want this to be a little bit smaller actually. And I can do a scale override on this component as well. So if I use the scale tool here, down at the bottom, I can hold down Shift to constrain my sizes. And I want it to be maybe 10 pixels tall, something like that, a little bit smaller. And now I'll just adjust the rest of these to be 10 pixels or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pixels from the stars. And I'm going to move this up here to just almost hit this. And very quickly you have your comments in here. Now the last piece I'm going to create is a little type your comment here widget down here. So I'm going to hit R for rectangle, draw a rectangle here that is 40, do 45 pixels here. And remember, we already created a user persona for this design, and that was Harry Truman. So I can click this avatar here and hold down Option. I'm just going to copy this down here and reuse this. And here, maybe I want the avatar to be 32 pixels. I'm going to line this to the left, let it sit at 20 pixels here. And add some text here. Type your comments here. Now I can reuse the same icon that we used previously. I'm going to go into my layers panel and hide the rest of these. So that's looking good, and I'll set that 20 pixels from the right here. And the last thing I want to do is create a white fill, and instead of a stroke, if we add a stroke here, you see that you have strokes around the edges. I don't want that. So I can show you how to add just a top and bottom stroke here. If we go under Effects and a Drop Shadow, we can actually add a 1 pixel drop shadow that has a 0 pixel blur, and that shows up as a stroke or a line. I'm going to make that 10 pixel opacity so it's pretty light. And I can just create a new one here. And I'll do the same thing except -1. 10% opacity, 0 pixel blur, and you can see we have a top and a bottom line here. Now I'm going to select all of this, create a new component, and when I do that, I'm just going to make sure that everything's pinned to the top left how it should be. Here this should be pinned to the center, and well, to the left here, and also to the center down here. And this could be pinned to the right, center, and now I'll just stretch this something like this and change the opacity to 20%. And the last thing we want to do is resize our frame. So we're going to click on the frame here, come down here and just resize this. I'm going to hold down Command to zoom in, and now if I hold down Option, I can see that this is 36 pixels from the base of this. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, holding down Command and the arrow keys, and then if I hold down Shift, 1, 2, 3, that'll move it 10 pixels 3 times. So you have a nice snug component in our frame. Also, we can try resizing this. We see that everything looks really good. And I'm going to pin this to the left and right. So now when we resize it, it kind of breaks down here. Looking really good. Same thing with these components, just really quickly, top left. These are all top left. This is left, right. So this is looking good. I can resize this now. Looking really decent. And then these guys we want just to be centered. Top center. There we go. You can move these around. We're just playing with some spacing now, just to get things looking good. I haven't had an exact spacing convention in here, mainly because I just wanted to use this time to teach you the actual tools, and later we're going to go in and fix a lot of the spacing. While we're inside here, we have some alignment issues for some of these things, so I'm just going to select all of them and align horizontal centers. And our design is starting to look really clean here. We did change the text here to blue, and we didn't change those here. So again, Option Command C, then we can select these layers, and Option Command V, and paste those layers in. Just going to clean up some things, make this all caps here. And this is looking really, really good. Our design is looking really good, and it's almost ready to prototype. But we're missing a few designs that I think are key to prototyping this correctly. And that is when we click on appetizers, entrees, or desserts, we want to see how that toggle looks between this. So to do this, we're going to create some more frames here, and I'm just going to move these over here to the right to make some room. And now I can hold down Option, and I'll copy this 2 times. And I'm going to rename this frame here. It's named Home, but I'm just going to name this Home Entrees. I'll name this one Home Appetizers, and this one Home Desserts. So to show you how these toggles work, let's just go in here. I'm going to zoom into all 3 of these, and I'll show you how you can change each of these. So here we have the entrees all correct. This is the appetizers screen. So to change the state here, I'm actually going to hold down Command, and if you hold down Command, it will drill inside of a group. Right now I'm just selecting a group, but if you want to select elements inside of the group without double clicking multiple times, just hold down Command. I can click on Entrees, and with some quick shortcuts, Option Command C to copy the style, Option Command V to paste the style, and then I'm going to select Dessert, do the same thing, Option Command C, Option Command V, and paste this. And I'm just going to move this line now over here and stretch this out a bit, holding down Option to lock my left and right symmetry here. So now we show appetizers, and the same thing with dessert. I'm just going to change this here, so it's the same process. Option Command C, Option Command V, Option Command C, Option Command V. And then I'll move this line over here to dessert, and just nudge this. And now we have entrees, appetizers, desserts. Inside of our assets folder, I have some text that we can copy here for the appetizers and for the desserts. So we have the recipe breadsticks text file for the appetizers and the recipe shortcake text file for the dessert. So we can quickly just select this, Command C to copy, and we'll click in here a few times, and Command V, and we'll just call this breadsticks. And now with home desserts, we're going to use this strawberry shortcake, Command C, Command V. And I'll just name this here. So now we have prime rib, breadsticks, strawberry shortcake. Now I want to change the rating of these breadsticks here. I'm actually going to give this 4 stars. So that's looking good. And if I want to give this 4 stars as well, I'm just going to delete that. And to make life simpler, I'm just going to Command C, click on this frame, and Command V. And I notice here that this isn't centered, so we can quickly use the center icon and center our star ratings. And I'm going to hold down Shift to select all of these. I'm just going to nudge this down a little bit so it's a little bit further away from this image. Now for the images. All we have to do is click inside of here, click choose image. We have our assets folder here. We're gonna look for some breadsticks here. And then the rest of the appetizer images, we have to click on this X to get out of there. Then click on this group, double click a few times until we see this image thumbnail. And we'll choose a new appetizer, these caprese. It's like mozzarella cheese with some tomatoes. And the last appetizer here is going to be hot wings. I love the hot wings. So we have that set up. We'll do the same thing over here. We know we want a strawberry shortcake. Let's go into our desserts. Dessert right here, strawberry shortcake. And to the left, we can add this chocolate cake. And feel free to Google your own images and place whatever you want in here. I'm just showing you the workflow for creating and duplicating some of these designs. The last thing I'm going to have is dessert ice cream cobbler. Okay, so we have home entrees, home appetizers, and home desserts. We zoom out here. You can see we have a nice complete design here, and we're ready to finally wrap things up on the design. Now that we've designed all of the elements inside of each one of these frames, I want to challenge you to give this design your own personality. You can use your own colors, your own fonts, and try playing around with the icons, the sizes, and everything else to make this app really your own. I'll also add some time on this design, just adding a few minor elements here to really give it a nice polish. By using the skills that you learned in the previous video, you should be well-rounded and be able to adjust a lot of these designs here, adjust the text, and anything else that you would like. One thing that I was interested in doing here as I was designing this is giving some of the shapes like this a little bit more organic feel. So I could double click into this, for example, and I can just tweak this circle just a little bit to make it look kind of like a ketchup blob. So we can do something like that just to give it a little bit more personality. And so try things like that and try different fonts. So for example, I like the font Fat Frank, so I can click on some of these text elements here and go into the text, just type in Fat Frank, and everything changes here. Looks like I have some extra text inside of here, so I'm just going to delete that and move this back. And so already there's some added personality here, and I can Option Command C to copy this style and even paste it across other elements here. So play with the corner radiuses here, play with the sizes, and when you're done with the design, feel free to add me as a collaborator. You can use the email caleb@brainspin.com to share your designs with me, and I'm happy to comment and give you advice along the way with your design. Also, if you want to share any parts of your design, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, just use the hashtag Figma recipe, and I'll be watching out for that hashtag and I can give you some comments and feedback there. Okay, so I've added some finishing touches here, and I can walk you through what I've done. I went and tweaked the font here. This was a handwritten font using the pencil tool, so I just tweaked the sizes to keep it more consistent. And then I used the Fat Frank font here for some of the header text or the menu text. I used that across the project here, and I changed my paragraph text to be Burial, which is a font that I really like. And so it just gives it just a little bit more personality here. It just looks a little bit more fun. And we can come down here. I played a little bit with the line heights, and I also made these circles just a little bit more organic here. And same thing here, so it looks like just like a drop of ketchup or something. And lastly, under the comments window, I just created a light gray rectangle here to kind of divide the comments section from the rest of this. And I actually forgot the style of this font here, so I'm just going to copy and paste this here. So now we have all of our artboards all designed and lined up here, and we are ready to begin prototyping. Finally, we are ready to prototype our design. Now prototyping is really easy, and you can find the prototyping tab here next to the design tab. And once you click on this prototyping tab, then you get this circle here to the right of every object that you select that you can click and drag to link your artboards up. So if we're starting off with the splash screen, we want to go from the splash screen to the home entrees screen here. And I'm going to zoom in here so that we can see just in a little bit more detail what I'm doing. And as you can see with these three screens, we want to link these up by clicking on appetizers to jump to this page and entrees to jump to this page. But they're all inside one group. Well, that's okay. We could link the group to other artboards, but that's not going to work in our case, so we can double click to drill into just this dessert text here. And we can drag this over to desserts. And we don't need to link up entrees because we're on the entrees page. We can link up appetizers. And same thing here. Entrees goes here. Desserts goes here. And same thing here. Entrees. Appetizers. So we already have those linked up. Now we can select these menu items and link these up here. And it looks like those are all correct. And now we're going to run into a bit of a problem here. We have these hyperlinks here. I created this all in one text box. And this works okay in most design cases, but if you want to prototype this, you can only prototype this one box. So it's not going to work for us. So we can jump back into design here. And I'm just going to select this text here and do a Command X to cut it. And now we'll just copy these elements down here. I'll paste this in, do the same thing, cut down here, paste this, and cut this last text, and paste again. These have to be individual text boxes just for the sake of prototyping. So now I want these to be 30 pixels apart, and that looks good now. So we can jump back into prototype mode. And now I can jump into popular recipes. Is going to be this page here. And we didn't design a saved recipes, shopping list, or settings screen. But if you wanted to design some screens to kind of mock up this interaction, you can do that and then just link to your saved recipes after you design something like that. So this will work for what we have so far. And so this menu, actually, we want this to link back to the popular recipes as well, kind of a slide back and forth type of thing. Now, if the user clicks on this image, we want that to link to the recipe details screen, and maybe this title too. So we're going to link this to the recipe details as well. And then as we're going down this list, if the user clicks on this last step, checking it off, they're going to get this screen saying you did it, share with your friends. And they can click on this X here to jump back, or maybe this background image, they can click on here and jump back as well. So I think we have everything linked up, and we can test it very quickly just to make sure. So we have the start screen right here. We can move it anywhere we want, but we're going to leave this at the splash screen here. And we'll just go into present mode, and let's see how well we've done. We have the design chef screen. We can click anywhere to jump into our popular recipes. And let's just see how this menu works here. So we can click there or click back. That toggle works great. Or we can click on popular recipes here. And we can toggle between appetizers, entrees, and desserts here. So that's looking really good. And I probably should have changed the timing because it doesn't take 5 hours for strawberry shortcake, but you can change that if you want. Now, we have that all set up, and you can see if I click here, nothing happens because we don't have a strawberry shortcake recipe. We don't have a breadsticks recipe, but we do have this prime rib roast, so that's going to jump us into this. And you see how this is zoomed out to show us the entire artboard? Well, what we want to do is change this fill area to display at 100% always. So now this behaves a little bit more like what you would see on the iPhone. Now, one thing I've noticed while prototyping, and this is why prototyping is so helpful, I don't have a way to jump back into that home screen. So very quickly, I can still jump into my prototyping file, and we can see down here we need an X icon. So I'm just going to zoom into these two artboards. I'll go back into design, and I already have an X right here that I can use, so I'll just hold down Option and bring this over here and just lay this in the center somewhere, and I'm going to make the fill white, and I probably want to make this a little bit bigger. So 20 pixels by 20 pixels, and that's looking good. I think that'll be a nice X screen. The last thing I'm going to do is just add a subtle drop shadow here of 50 pixel opacity and 0 pixels vertically. So we have that nice X. We can still jump into our prototyping present mode, and we can see that we have that X now. But if we go back into our design and go into prototype view, now I can choose to have this X come back over to entrees, jump back into my prototyping, and now I can toggle back and forth between these. So again, as you prototype, you'll see things like this where you may get stuck in the prototyping or the interaction, and you'll have to go back into your design, add some buttons, and then test again to make sure that somebody can go through your design. The last screen we have right here is we can check off this last step, and we have this "Congratulations, you did it" screen, and we can click X to jump back into our prime rib roast. Now that we have everything prototyped here, when we're in prototype mode, we can click on Share Prototype right here, and we can either add people's emails to share this to them, or we can click Copy Link here. So now that the link is copied to the clipboard, we can text or email that link to anybody that we'd like. Okay, and now that I have this link emailed to me, I can tap on the link here. It'll open this up in your browser, and once I sign into Figma, I can play with this prototype here directly through this browser. So if I click on appetizer, dessert, entrees, I can click on the menu, and you can really see this live on your device, which is really helpful. As you're designing your app, sometimes it's really helpful to see what these screens are going to look like directly on your device. And to do that, Figma has a nice app for Android and for iPhone, and it's called the Figma Mirror app. So just look in the Google Play Store for Figma Mirror, or look in the Apple App Store for Figma Mirror. And once you download this app, you can sign in using your Figma login name and password, and you'll be presented with a screen that tells you to click on a frame on your desktop to see what it looks like on your phone. So here we have the home entrees frame, and when I click on this, you can see that our iPhone updates showing us what this frame looks like directly on the device. And one thing that's really nice about this is you can tweak your sizes, you can move things around, and these things happen live directly on your device as well. So sometimes I like to design some icons that are quite large here, and you don't know how large they're going to be in relation to your device. And so it's nice to look at that and then do a quick resizing here to make the sizes relative to your screen and make the tap area large enough so that you can't miss it. Please share your designs with me. I would love to give you feedback using the comment tool here and help you out with your design. If you have any questions at all after designing all of these and after going through the video, if you click this share icon here, you can share this with friends and colleagues, any design files that you want. Or if you'd like to share with me, just type in caleb@brainspin.com here, and then you can choose for me to just view if you'd like. And if I have view access, I still have the ability to comment and give you feedback without going in and messing up your design. I'm excited to see your design and to see the things that make sense to you and what doesn't make sense to you, and I would love to help you out beyond this course. Now when you do click on this share icon, you can share to multiple people this way, or you can copy a link and share it through a text or email. And you can also embed this design directly inside of a blog. So if you enable public access here, it'll make it viewable by everybody, and it will give you some code that you can embed inside of WordPress or any other blog that you want to share. So when somebody logs into your website, they can see this design, and even as you update the design, it will show on your blog as well. please share your designs with me. I would love to give you feedback using the comment tool here and help you out with your design. If you have any questions at all after designing all of these and after going through the video, if you click this share icon here, you can share this with friends and colleagues, any design files that you want. Or if you'd like to share with me, just type in caleb@brainspin.com here, and then you can choose for me to just view if you'd like. And if I have view access, I still have the ability to comment and give you feedback without going in and messing up your design. I'm excited to see your design and to see the things that make sense to you and what doesn't make sense to you, and I would love to help you out beyond this course. Now when you do click on this share icon, you can share it to multiple people this way, or you can copy a link and share it through a text or email. And you can also embed this design directly inside of a blog. So if you enable public access here, it'll make it viewable by everybody, and it will give you some code that you can embed inside of WordPress or any other blog that you want to share. So when somebody logs into your website, they can see this design, and even as you update the design, it will show on your blog as well. Now if you add any collaborators using this share icon, you can add them to only view or to edit the design itself. But all collaborators that have access to this design all have the ability to comment. So if I click show comments here, you'll be able to interact with multiple collaborators by clicking on a frame and just typing something like, "Those breadsticks look yummy." And they have some basic emoticons that you can use, and you just hit post, and there's my comment. If there's any comments for feedback, if somebody giving you feedback on color changes or padding, if you finish, you can click this resolve button here, and you can see that they're hidden in the list of comments. You can toggle the resolved comments on and off here, and if you toggle them back on, you can unresolve them if they need further editing. Also, any collaborators that you share with this project, anytime that you comment anything, then I have right here enabled to receive email notifications. So if I share this with anybody and they comment, I'm going to get an email that shows me what they commented. I can click on that email link and jump right into the frame that they're commenting on. After you've finished with your design and you tested out the prototype and everything looks really good, you probably want to export some of these assets for your developers to use. A good way to do this is to look at each screen. So we have this screen right here with the chef's hat icon and then some custom text here. So I'm going to just group all of this text. I'm going to name this title, chef's recipe, and here I'm just going to name this icon, chef's hat. And you just want to make sure that all of your graphics are named correctly, the name that you want the file to export as. And now if we click on this export button here, we can see that there's 0 of 0 selected designs. That's because if we want to use this, we want to make these graphics exportable. So we can click on this plus icon here, and we can choose to export this as PNG, JPEG, or SVG. Now if we choose PNG, we can export this at its exact pixel size. Or if we want to add a 2 times or a 3 times, you can just keep on hitting this plus icon and it will create some multiple sizes here. So we have a 2x, 3x, and if we want text appended to the file name, that's what this is doing here. So it's going to say icon chef's hat at 2x at 3x. So very quickly, I'm enabling these two to be exported. 1 time, 2 time, 3 times, and let's go over here. The same thing, we want to make sure that these are named correctly. So we can just name this timer, name this heart, just really quickly. You probably have different naming conventions, but just make it really simple for your developers to find what they want. And you want to do this throughout all of the designs here, but let's just use these 3. So I can select all 3 of these and come down here, I'm going to hit plus. It's exporting those as 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Right here. So now I don't have to have anything selected because I've preset those to be exportable. I can click on this export now and it'll tell me there's 15 graphics that are going to be exported. And you see this is 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, and this is giving me an error that the origin is not aligned to pixels. but we can quickly click export. I'm going to just export this to my desktop. And I'll create a new folder called Assets and hit Save. And now when I go into my Assets folder under my desktop, when I created these, you can see the names of these: comments, at 2x, at 3x. And so very easily I can see what these look like. So this is 3 times, 2 times, and 1 time. They're different sizes, and you can pass these off to your developer to use while they're developing the front end of this design. Another thing you can do to export assets for your developers is just share this Figma file with them, and they don't have to know how to design, they just have to know how to grab these elements and even mark some of these elements themselves as exportable. So for example, if we click on this home entrees here and we go to the code section, your developer can still click on these icons. They can name them whatever they want here, and they can choose to export these however they want to export these, whatever's going to be the best format for them. And they can export these individually, so if they click export button menu, for example, they can go into the same folder and click save. And if we jump back into here, you can see that those are also saved here. So it's very easy to export these things out, and in fact, once you preset these elements, if you ever change them in the future and click to re-export, it'll just overwrite over those existing images and create new, fresh versions automatically.